It is 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A very good morning to you. I should give you a quick warning, actually. Good morning warning. I've got a lot of thoughts jostling for prominence in my mind at the moment, all on a similar theme, but I am ashamed to confess that I haven't yet brought complete clarity to the context. So you need to wait and see roughly what direction we're going in. I think that the obvious intention of Wes Streeting, the new Secretary of State for Health, to open the NHS even up to private businesses is fascinating, but we need probably a little bit more detail before we can dive into that properly, except for the principle of it. Does this mean that the NHS, how comfortable are we? I warned you that thoughts were jostling for prominence. How comfortable are we with the idea of private companies making some money out of what the NHS does? Because this ties in with the big announcements from Rachel Reeves about making public money available to support private sector. And you'd think, wouldn't you, looking at the state of the waterways, that this was an absolutely disastrous thing to do. But, of course, if you can get your head around the idea of limits on private sector profits. So you can run a water company, for example, but you can't take home a £2 million dividend if you're pumping shocking amounts of sewage into the... That is going to be the way forward. That is not socialism in any conventional sense, but is it inevitable? But that's not where we are going today, I don't think. What I want to do today is talk about people who are not working. There are two types of people who are not working currently, people who don't want to work and people who can't work. Actually, there's probably three types, isn't there? People who are ready and willing to work but are currently and hopefully briefly in a space where they haven't got the right opportunity. That's always a fascinating question, isn't it? How long is too long? And you know, what parameters, or by what do you start getting squeezed to the point where you take a job after 10 weeks signing on that you wouldn't have taken after 2 weeks? But it's the health element of things that intrigues me most. Just so you know, because I know a lot of people are concerned about this, I am looking at long COVID, and we will be talking about it at some point in the very near future, because I think long COVID is a very, very important and a probably criminally overlooked element of some of the things that we're about to talk about, some of the reasons why people are economically inactive or people are out of the workforce for health reasons. 2.8 million people off work due to long-term sickness. The key difference in rhetoric, and I'm very surprised that this needs explaining, but I guess if you are struggling to work out what to do in a world where your dreams of Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, Theresa May, and even David Cameron have been dashed to smithereens upon the rocks of reality, then you are going to need some fairly straightforward stuff explaining. And one of the first things that needs to be explained is that the difference between saying you're a malingering skiver, get your ass back to work, and saying you are poorly, we need to help you get back to work, is huge. In many ways, this is the, what would you call it, the distillation, the essence of the difference, for me at least, and this is simplistic but sincere, the difference between left-wing and right-wing politics. In many ways. And there are good conservatives. Alex Chalker's given a very it's the curse of O'Brien again. He's given a very interesting interview about how he actually wanted to stop sending so many people to jail for short prison sentences because they do way more harm than good, something that the new Minister James Timpson happens to agree with. But but for me, the distillation of certainly the binary breakdown between left and right politics really comes into focus when you remember how Mel Stride was talking about 2.8 million people off work due to long-term sickness, essentially saying that they just needed to pull their socks up, or that it was easy, for example, to get a mental health diagnosis, and that loads of people were choosing to live on the pittance that you can secure by getting this assignation as opposed to being out and doing work. Versus, and Wes Streeting is not, I don't think, a particularly cuddly politician, but there is nothing fundamentally bad about saying that you want people to get back to work to contribute more and drive economic growth, because it depends which end of the telescope you're deploying. If you approach this subject honestly and compassionately, you speak to countless people who really want to work but currently can't. How many times, when we had the conversations inspired by the performative cruelty of male stride, did we hear from people who cited the importance of the role that the employer plays in this process? That the employer who recognises that you can't work today but you really want to work tomorrow, metaphorically speaking, is worth their weight in gold. And that figure of 2.8 million people off work due to long-term sickness would be much higher if there were not employers out there who understand the difference. Jamie uses one of my favourite words, the quintessence he reaches for. I prefer distillation. The quintessence of the difference is that the left want to help and the right want to blame. We've spent years being told by our government that they hate us, with the caveat, the parentheses, that they don't mean you. Oh, we absolutely hate you, but we don't mean you. If you're off sick, we hate you. Don't want to help you. But, no, we don't mean you. I know you're really sick. Oh, of course. We absolutely hate you. Hate immigrants. Oh, no, we don't mean you. We certainly don't mean your parents. We don't mean you. So and the problem with the left, of course, historically, can be idealism and naivety. I mean the sensible left, the rational left, the centrist left, if you like, as opposed to the headbangers. That there is a willingness to believe the best of people even when they don't deserve it. So you can't deny that there will be some people on long-term sickness who are swinging the lead. You just can't deny it. Of course there will be. But it's such a measly existence to have selected that to use that tiny minority to somehow portray the entire population of poorly people is bogus. It's disgusting, but it's also ridiculous. It makes as much sense as finding an asylum seeker who's committed a crime and using that as a basis for not wanting any asylum seekers to be offered asylum in this country. But it works. As we have seen, it works rhetorically, even if it doesn't actually work in policy terms. So how do we do this? 11 minutes after 10 is the time. I think we do it like this. I think we look at the question of how much help you currently get when you can't work but want to. How does it actually break down? I want you to feel a little bit liberated this morning. I want you to breathe a cautious sigh of relief. I want you to recognise that although Wes Streeting is not a cuddly politician, he is describing you as being long-term sick and presuming that you would rather not be out of work. He is not describing you as work shy or lazy, as malingering or as lying about your condition. So how can he help? Or how can the system help? What is the obstacle to work that you think could actually be taken down? Because it could all be built on naivety, this. It could all be built on optimism trumping reality. How many of the 2.8 million people currently off work due to long-term sickness can actually be helped back to work quite easily? And the only people that can tell us that, I think, are the people currently in that situation. So what do you need? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What would it look like? What would policies look like? If we're going to, I think I'll use the word celebrate. I know I'm setting myself up for a big fall if they don't deliver any of the things that they're promising to deliver, but you've got to have hope. I even had hope when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister for exactly 2 hours and 43 minutes. So I am hopeful that a lot of people who are long-term sick can be helped back to work. And the first step on that path is to stop screaming at them that they're lazy, work-shy layabouts and stop feeding into that Rupert Murdoch rhetoric that the British public are not deserving of respect and that they're all lying and they're all disgusting. Brackets, I don't mean you. The first step to helping people back to work is to believe their reasons for not being at work. So what then? What's the second step and the third step and the fourth step? How do we actually help you? And if you're a doctor or an employer, what help do you need? But in the first instance, how do we address? Do you know what? Actually, I'm a bit conscious of overdosing on hopium. But actually, I've done one of those intros where I've got to the end of it and I'm a lot more pepped up than I was at the beginning. Because that big change, that sea change in rhetoric, albeit that it's not a violent sea change, and Streeting, hasn't sort of come out and put his arms around everybody who's long-term sick, but he has not called them lazy, has not claimed that people with depression are dishonest. He's not claimed that people with post-traumatic stress disorder should sort of pull their socks up and give their head a wobble. He seems to be coming at it from a different and refreshing perspective, all underpinned by the distinctively conservative, small c conservative idea that one of the main reasons to help people get better is so that they can pay more taxes. I've got no problem with that. And I don't really think you have. I don't see how you can have a problem with that as long as people are genuinely better and generally being helped into that position. 10:15 is the time. 0345 6060973 is the question you need. What does a compassionate, evidence-based policy designed to help long-term sick people back to work look like? 0345 6060973. It's 10:16. It is 18 minutes after 10. There will be people, as Andy reminds us, who can't really be helped back to work in any conceivable sense. Andy's multiple sclerosis means he would need an entirely new central nervous system to get back to work. But I don't think we've overlooked that, but I'm happy to reiterate it or acknowledge it more explicitly. That is not the mission that has been set by government. The mission is to help people whose illness prevents them from working to get better. So waiting lists are one of the most obvious ways. What if you're off work with a bad back? I think my new catchphrase for at least the first few months of the new government is going to be, I can't believe this needs explaining, but apparently it does. If you're off work with a bad back and you're waiting 6 months for your operation, you can't work for 6 months. You are signed off long-term sick. If you have your operation, you could be back at work next week. I'm simplistic in medical terms. I'm not a trained doctor, but the failure, not just of Tory politicians, but of their client journalists, to understand these really simple points has come into sharp relief this morning when you see what the alternative looks like. Some people will be too stupid to see it. We'll get Idiot's Corner open nice and early. Matthew is in Welling. Ha, ha, ha. O'Brien, Labour's no better than the Tories. What are you going to do now? I can't believe that this needs explaining, but the difference between saying to a poorly person, you are a lying skiver, get back to work now, and saying, I'm so sorry that you're so poorly, here's how we're going to help you get back to work. If you can't see the difference between those two things, mate, then you may actually get a season ticket for Idiot's Corner. Let's start in Yorkshire. Rick's in Kiverton. Rick, what would you like to say?
Nice to speak to you. So I am off long-term sick. I have disability as well as mental health. And
just going to sort your phone light out, Rick, and come back to you, mate. I don't know whether you've moved around a bit since you got through, but we will try to restore that contact. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. Laura's in Romford. Laura, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to say thank you for being a beacon of sanity over the last few years.
Well, what if we're both mad?
Well, yeah, there is that.
Go on.
So I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher for about 18 years. Oh God, that makes me feel old. And I've got lupus and a blood condition, and makes me often very ill, like fevers.
Yes.
Can't get out of bed. I'd say probably about 25% of the time I'm bedridden.
Gosh.
I've got 2 young children, and the school I was at previously, it was a big school, couldn't cope with it. There was no flexibility whatsoever, and I ended up being signed off medically, couldn't do the job.
Right.
And I was at work for about 3-4 years, sort of doing a bit of tutoring here and there, and I've now ended up in a much smaller pupil referral unit.
Okay.
And my head teacher has absolutely gone out of her way to make the job fit around me. The flexibility is amazing. And I think if we could have that flexibility somehow enshrined in law and make sure that employers had these strategies for flexibility, people would be back in work. Because if she hadn't gone out of her way to make this job,
so how does that flexibility work then? Because to be the devil's advocate for a moment, if I might be thinking, well, listen, if you can't guarantee that you're going to be here tomorrow, then you're no use to me. But clearly that's not true. So how does the flexibility work in real time?
So I'm in charge of the kind of SEN department,
right?
And if I'm unwell, she lets me work from home sometimes. And obviously, that's not, if you're face-to-face teaching, that isn't possible. But she
knows that that's not going to happen every day.
Yeah, exactly. And she's wonderful. I can't praise her enough. She's so sympathetic. She knows I'll do the work, but I need to be able to do it on the hours that I can do it, if you know what I mean.
Yes. How confident could we be that extends deep into the 2.8 million people on long-term sickness? I don't suppose we know until we try, do we?
No, I guess it's about being holistic and changing the culture for employers to make them, give them strategies to make jobs work around people who, are disabled. At the end of the day, I claim PIP. I've got a blue badge. I am disabled. And if we, rather than punishing these people, if we can give, employers ways to make, strategies, I think, because I wouldn't be in work if it weren't for the flexibility of my employer. And
that is, I mean, you are a perfect example of the pudding that we're sharing today. You were being written off as someone who chose not to be in work, or who was
100%. It was my last school made me feel that I was lazy in some way. I was, even when I was in hospital.
Not just the good. So I think more of the political rhetoric, but you actually get it from employers as well. But I suppose the two go hand in hand. If the public discourse is being defined by people like Mel Stride rather than by people like you and me, then an employer, for good or for ill, whether through ill will or through just not really paying a lot of attention, may arrive at the wrong negative conclusions, and everybody suffers as a result.
Yeah.
I like this. Well, thank you. And of course, the phone lines are open. So as Laura gives us all a nice dose of optimism and hopium with an evidence-based success story, there is, of course, room for you to rain on everybody's parade. And I don't mean that mockingly. I mean that we need to have naivety alarms, I think, when you are licking your wounds after 14 years of lies, corruption and moral depravity. Just the simple notion that a change is as good as a rest won't last much beyond Christmas. Sinead is in Wirksworth in Derbyshire. Sinead, what would you like to say?
Hello. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous because I didn't expect to actually get through.
It's only me.
This is actually the first time I've listened live to you, so I normally say my comments to myself.
Well, do you say them out loud, or do you say them out loud?
Yeah,
that's important. Very important.
Yeah, helps to process it.
Welcome.
Hello. So I feel like probably with most problems,
yes,
there's various solutions. It goes across a lot of different areas. So my husband's been out of work on and off for various health reasons, but for long periods of time. So he'd fall in that category of long-term sick. One thing that I think would have helped, we were both going to the job centre because we were both out of work. I found work earning £19,000 living in London. And he just got cut off because I was earning enough, and that was fine. Obviously, even if you cut the money off, I think if he could still have access to the job centre, had a weekly meeting with the person that's helping you to look for jobs, have access to the little courses and things that they can put you on.
Yes.
That could have helped him to keep looking.
But this is really interesting, because that wouldn't... I mean, you're talking about when he's come off the illness and is still unemployed. So I hadn't thought about that. I bet that category is quite huge as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've maybe not clarified that particular time was he'd had to leave the profession he was in, which was a chef.
Yes.
Because he had bad knees and back. Yeah. And every doctor he spoke to was like, you cannot stand up for 12 hours a day in the kitchen.
12 hours a day, no, absolutely.
So he was trying to switch career, but with no A-levels or degree or anything, but also not able to do physical manual labour. There weren't many jobs that really would work.
Slotted
he
into
could
that
really
space.
do. Yeah.
But there probably were, but he just had no idea how to find them.
Yeah, so if he'd have had that help and support and the opportunities for training and encouragement, I think that could have been a different situation, even if they still cut the benefit, even if they still thought £19,000 was enough for
a couple
two
to live
people
on
to
in
live
London.
on in London.
What difference does the rhetoric make to this process? I'm fascinated by the mental impact, but below the level at which it would constitute a mental health diagnosis. A colleague said to me this morning when we were thrashing out this topic, she said, do you know, it's as if they've been telling us that they hate us for years, talking about the category that I guess your husband is in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. I think I found a lot of the time people, would ask me like, oh, has he found a job yet? Oh, is he in work yet? What's he doing now? Like, everyone's kind of got this thing of like,
it must be a choice, or he just needs to pull his socks up.
Yeah, and like, what's he doing? And it's like, everything he's applying for, he's not hearing back at all, because they all want either relevant experience or a qualification, which is reasonable.
Yes, of course.
But he's not really got away.
Saps your resolve that a bit. You begin to feel that your self-esteem begins to slip, and that can have an impact on your motivation. Oh, crikey, Sinead, it's hopium morning today, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah.
I think we've earned it. And is he in a better place now, or are we still?
So we've had ups and downs.
Yes.
So he got into a better place, caring for his grandparents. That gave him, per person back to, all of that. But then he did get COVID, and he's got very bad asthma. So he's now got long COVID.
I think this is a big deal.
And this is kind of the other element of it is the NHS, like you said, that if you can't get treated, it's been 2 years.
If I was Wes Streeting, I'd have this very high up on my list. I think, in the context of what can be done today to help, the answer would simply be start taking it seriously, recognise the scale of the problem, and put clinics in place. We had a long COVID clinic. There was one in Chelsea and Westminster Hospital that a pal of mine almost discovered. I don't know what happened to it. He's fine now, but the seriousness of that subject is something we're going to be having a proper look at in the coming weeks, and it has to be a big part of this story. Albeit that there's not an obvious answer to the question of how do we cure it or fix it, and if there was, then it would be a bigger part of this phone-in today. I wish you both well, Sinead. Thank you. Nice to have you listening live. It's extraordinary how many people listen to the podcast these days. I always feel like I neglect you a bit. If you are listening on the podcast, this is a special hello just for you. Hello. It's coming up to 10:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Of course, it's not coming up to 10:30 if you're listening on the podcast, but Thomas Watts, regardless of what time it is, as you listen, has your headlines. 10:31 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I will return to this territory, but it's not obviously the territory we're exploring today. But because you asked so nicely, I will make the point that it's not just the sick who contribute to this broader issue of not contributing to the Exchequer. I'm highly qualified, writes my texter, but not contributing to income tax because the job market is terrible. I've applied for over 100 jobs and have had 0 interviews. I'm now looking at options overseas, at which point, of course, the decision to abolish our own freedom of movement will become problematic. 10:32 is the time, and the question is, what does help look like? If we seem to be moving away from the Tory rhetoric of shouting at people who are off sick to pull up their socks, or stop malingering, or stop claiming that you're depressed when, what did he say? What were his exact words? Just a little bit low or something like that. Recognising the reality of people's conditions becomes the first step towards helping them. So what does proper help look like as opposed to simply shouting, get up, you lazy git? Rick's in Kiverton. Rick, a better line, I hope. What would you like to say?
Oh, well, you tell me, James. Is it better for you?
Yes, it is. On you crack.
No worries. So, as I was telling you, producer, I'm on long-term sick through disability and mental illness. I had to give up my last role 18 months ago due to my conditions interfering with my work. And since then...
When you say you had to, could it have been different if your employer was more understanding, or was it a sort of an event horizon type?
It was one of those. They were as helpful as they could be. They gave me additional leave, like absence.
But it reached a point of being unsustainable.
Yeah, it got to the point where I was going to be put in disciplinary measures, and I thought it was best for both parties if I went, because it's something I couldn't control, and I didn't want to end up losing my job over it.
Sure.
So I came off work and thought, a couple of months after everything's settled down, I can jump back into the job market. And I've had a few interviews since, and they've all gone the same way. As soon as they ask me reason for leaving last employment, I tell them my disabilities, because I've been told by some disability charities that deal with my disability, seizures and things, that I don't have to bring it forward unless I'm asked in an interview. But if I'm offered employment, I legally have to tell them.
And at that point, you can see the lights in their eyes go out.
Oh, the conversation changes completely.
So how do we change that? How can that be improved from an institutional or a political perspective?
I've seen on a few job websites they have a disability-friendly section, but I've not seen many jobs in them. From what I heard you saying this morning about the changing rhetoric about long-term illness and long-term sick.
Well, it's 52% evidence, 48% hope at the moment, Rick. So let's not start counting our chickens.
Well, it's nice to hear even them just saying it as opposed to the last 14 years. I think more can be done with maybe getting employees involved in deciding or how they approach everyone's disability differently, because mine are hidden. I look okay until I mention it, and then it just takes one seizure. And would you employ somebody who can't guarantee that they'll be conscious 100% of the time?
Well, yes, I would, actually, if I fully understood what your condition was. I'm thinking of the caller from the PRU system, where you'd have thought that chronic pain, which I think you also suffer from, these things that are debilitating. If I can frame my employment in a way that recognises the possibility stroke likelihood of you having a seizure or you being in too much pain to work, then we can find a position of mutual benefit. Is it crass to talk about letting the perfect be the enemy of the good? You might not be the perfect employee because you will, as you say yourself, perhaps lose consciousness at some point in the working week, but that is still better than you not being there at all for both of you, for you and the employer. But the employer doesn't quite see it like that.
I always try to be as good as I can be in the workplace, but like I say, it's out of my hand, out of my control how often I can be, my eyes can be open. But I've noticed it is more employer based with mine, how they react to it.
Yeah. And that's something that Streeting hasn't really set out much of a plan to address. And you individually could do more. A couple of people being in touch saying it sounds as if you might have had a case against your old employer, or even against the interviewers in whom you sense a distinct change in attitude when you talk about a disability. That there is a case for discrimination there. But most of us haven't got the appetite or the resources to go down that road, have we?
No, but
so that's something government could look at. I mean, it could use a stick and a carrot, couldn't it?
It could. But I mean, with what some people have messaged in to say about the discrimination part, I can see it, I can't prove it.
No, but that's what tribunals are for, so that someone else makes a decision on the available evidence. I wish you well, Rick. You know that I do. You'll like this, I think, from Joe. My dad had a saying. He used to say, it's hard to pull your socks up when you've got none on, which is probably the central flaw in what Mel Stride liked to describe as trying to help people back to work. There is, as you are probably aware, an unfolding story in Hertfordshire at the moment involving 3 women being found in dead in a property in Bushey, and the suspect in the case is at loose. Henry Riley, LBC's reporter, is in Bushey, in Hertfordshire, where the women were found. What exactly do we know at this point, Henry?
Well, James, good morning. As you can imagine, it's still details very much coming out at the moment. We know that police are still searching for a 26-year-old man, still may be armed, as police have said, after 3 women, as you say, died following serious injuries. It's here on a very quiet cul-de-sac in Bushey in Hertfordshire. When I arrived, there were just a handful of people. Now, as you can imagine, a significant presence of journalists and also more and more police officers arriving. It happened at 7 o'clock yesterday evening. Armed police and emergency crews rushed to a property here on Ashlyn Close, and police confirmed that they are still looking, their major crime unit, for a 26-year-old man called Kyle Clifford. Now, he is from the Enfield area. He's wanted in connection with the incident. Police saying he is likely in Hertfordshire or in North London. They also confirmed that they've been searching throughout the night. Now, the East of England Ambulance Service, when they arrived, found 3 women all suffering from serious injuries, and all of whom sadly died a short time later at the scene. It's believed that all of the women were related. Now, detectives have launched a triple murder investigation. Detective Superintendent Rob Hall from the Major Crime Unit has asked anyone with information to come forwards to call 999, adding, crucially, of course, that he may still be in possession of a weapon, urging people not to approach him. Matt Termaine is the MP for Watford and has spoken with LBC.
Well, clearly this is a tragic case. I understand that the police are urgently doing everything that they can to apprehend the person that they believe is responsible for this crime. And I would certainly urge any members of the public who have any information at all that would be of help with this case to come forward and to assist the police.
And James, often as you hear with these tragic incidents, a lot of local residents extremely surprised, extremely worried that this has happened in what is a very quiet area of Bushey, now very much flooded by police cars. You can probably hear the helicopter above me as well. But that key line to really emphasise, James, that police are still searching for a 26-year-old man, Kyle Clifford, and believing he may be armed. So anyone with information urged to contact police, and crucially, people asked not to approach him.
And photographs, of course, are available at lbc.co.uk. Henry, do we know any more about the victims, apart from the fact that they all belong to the same family?
Not clear at the moment. I mean, I think if they were under 18, James, we would have found out at this stage, potentially. Very much police using the words women. So I imagine they are all adults, just based on the limited information that we have. But we do know they are all closely related, all from the same family. But of course, I imagine we will get those details in the coming hours, if not days.
Henry Riley live in Bushey in Hertfordshire, where, as you heard, the bodies of 3 women have been found in a house, and the police have named Kyle Clifford, a 26-year-old from the Enfield area, as being wanted in connection with those deaths. You can follow that story. Well, I follow it here. We'll be bringing you up to date with any developments, but if you want to find out more, then lbc.co.uk will be providing comprehensive coverage as well. As always, it is 10:41. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There's a lot of confusion out there, not among you and me necessarily, but in the system about what is and what is not required, what employers can and can't do. Sue in Ramsgate is very much involved in this world and tells us that there's no obligation to disclose what we might call an invisible disability to a potential employer, although obviously there are circumstances where it is advisable to do so. So I have a colleague who's quite, I don't think of him as being disabled, but he's paraplegic. And the reason why I don't think of him as being disabled is that you just forget. It just becomes the most normal thing in the world. And the idea that they would be a less desirable colleague or a less desirable employee because of their disability is palpably absurd. And yet in a different universe, with a different skill set, they may not have found a role that is suitable for their talents, and in which their disability becomes more or less irrelevant. Or even if it were relevant, it's easily dealt with. It's easily accommodated. 10:43 is the time. Tom's in Shenton in Leicestershire. Tom, what would you like to say?
Well, firstly, James, I'd like to say thank you for having the conversation today. And it's just been so refreshing hearing the change in attitude.
Well, again, I'm 52-48. I don't imagine the Labour Party are going to start sounding like Mel Stride anytime soon, but actions speak louder than words, don't they? But yes, a bit of cautious optimism.
Indeed. So my situation's similar to a lot of the callers that you've had on so far. I can work. I don't think I would ever, even at my best, be described as well. I can do up to maybe 20 odd hours a week, preferably remote, but there are times when, for no apparent reason, I can't work. So it's that understanding and a lack of pressure being applied by an employer. I was really lucky for the last 5 years or so to have a job that was just perfect. They sort of left me to my own devices. I didn't have fixed hours. I could just sort of do up to 20 hours. It didn't matter if one day I was curled up in bed and couldn't even get out of bed in pain.
Yes.
Or
I'm sorry.
So it's that understanding. But equally, I think I'm quite aware, as your previous caller was saying, that if you had two candidates for a role, one was me and one was, in inverted commas, normal, I wouldn't pick me.
That's a brutal thing to say, isn't it? But I understand exactly where you're coming from.
I mean, it's the reality of it. If you have someone that you won't be able to rely on through no fault of their own or your own, and someone who you feel you could rely on. So I think the thing we need to work out is how on earth do you incentivize or encourage that understanding such that someone who I can contribute a lot. I was doing a PhD and had to stop because it was taking too much of a toll on my health. Like, I'm a bright guy, but
clearly,
sorry, that sounds really arrogant, doesn't it? But
have you forgotten who you're talking to? There's nothing you could say that would make you the most arrogant contributor to this conversation. Literally nothing.
Thank you.
What about the health side of it? Could you be getting more? I mean, it's entirely up to you how much you tell us about your condition, but could that be improvable when the NHS efficiency levels start rising again, if they start rising again?
To a degree. Even, like I say, even when I'm well, I'm limited and always have been. Like, my best every year at school, I had like 20% attendance, which was...
oh, my.
So like... That's the level of, I'm never going to be well.
But it is a question of making a fit. You know, I don't know if you were listening last week. I think it was late last week when we talked about the 4-day week. Or was it early this week? But you oddly, some of the things that you've said remind me of that conversation where, I don't know if you saw that, there's a Liberal Democrat council in Cambridgeshire that offered people the opportunity to keep the same amount of money and do the same amount of work, but do it over 4 days instead of 5. And it has, by most measures, worked a treat. And yet at the same time, Asda offered people to do exactly the same amount of work over 4 days, same number of hours over 4 days that they were previously doing over 5 days, and they were all knackered. So the sort of lazy presumption that the number of hours done is directly linked to productivity is not true. And that's what I thought of when you talked about, I know I can do my 20 hours, but I can't guarantee when I will do them. That shouldn't matter, should it, really, as much as it does?
As long as you're getting the work done. But again, I think it does just come back down to that. If you've got two candidates, as I said, I would go for the...
Yeah, you keep saying that. I wish I could somehow persuade you otherwise. Let me read what Beatrice said. This caller is so used to other people putting him down for his disability that he has now taken it upon himself, like so many of us. I'll leave you with that thought, because I'm not going to patronise you, but that's how you sound to Beatrice, who is obviously in a similar position, is that you've internalised what was previously external. Because if you can do those 20 hours, you could easily be doing them better than somebody who doesn't have your condition, doesn't have your disability. You use the word normal, which I don't think either of us are supremely comfortable with. But if you can do those hours better, perhaps, than that person over there who you think you'd hire before you hired you. There's a bit of counterintuitivity there, I think.
That's about it. It's a complicated subject.
You're telling me it's a complicated subject, and that's why I need calls like you, people like you, to call the programme and help me navigate the complicated territory. And that there again is something in the air that's changing, because a recognition that it's a complicated subject shuts down most lines of right-wing tabloid rhetoric. Unemployment is a complicated subject. Long-term illness is a complicated subject. You will not be able to solve complicated subjects with simple quasi-populist solutions like, well, everybody just needs to work harder, or well, the people these days, the young, don't have a work ethic. These are meaningless tropes that manage to paper over societal cracks. And, of course, the people doing the papering over the societal cracks don't care one jot about the people who have already fallen through them. It's 10:49. It is 10:51, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's not. I think maybe it counts as an unhinged headline. They're certainly providing us with some interesting territory. Although we have a sense, and this isn't the royal we. This is literally us here talking together off air. But we have a sense that the appetite for talking about the Tories is currently quite low. So, I mean, you can throw them into relief. You're talking about something that the current government is doing, and you can compare it with what the previous government has done. So, most obviously, the conversation we're having today, the difference between telling people who are long-term sick that we recognise that you are long-term sick and will hopefully help you get back to work, rather than giving interviews to friendly newspapers saying, a lot of them are swinging the lead, a lot of them are on the lam, a lot of them are just getting signed off. It's too easy to get signed off as depressed, so they're doing it as a lifestyle choice. That makes everything worse. That's clear to see. Well, of course, with the acknowledgement that there is none so blind as those that will not see. But the travails the Tory party is facing, I've sensed certainly that your appetite for talking about that isn't so high. Mine still is, and usually if I'm highly engaged with the subject, then some sort of wireless osmosis occurs, and you end up being highly engaged with it as well. Or alternatively, you are interested in talking about the Conservative Party. I've just been asking you the wrong questions. But either way, they are still providing us with an awful lot of fodder for one of our favourite features on this programme. 10:53 is the time. In fact, we may have to launch a new feature, which we will call Circular Firing Squad. But for the time being, we're sticking with this.
Unhinged headline.
Braverman claims Tory rival Jenrick, that's Honest Bob Jenrick, the mural remover, is on the left of the party.
Unhinged headline.
My thanks to Suella Braverman for providing us with that. She's also provided us with food for thought in another area, which we will probably move on to in the next hour. But back to this conversation about 2.8 million people off work due to long-term sickness, and what a compassionate campaign to help them back to work might look like. Because we know what it doesn't look like. But what does it look like? Phil's in Liverpool. Phil, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Hope we are well today. Just a word of warning for your callers, by the way. I'm a quadriplegic, so I use a Bluetooth headset, so I am sorry if my audio is less than studio quality.
Well, it's probably me that will appreciate that heads up, so I don't start barking at you about having
Yeah, at least I don't have an accent, right?
Go on.
But, I'll tell you something. I do have every bit of sympathy for your callers and listeners with invisible illnesses.
Yeah.
Because like I say, I have multiple sclerosis, MS. It has rendered me quadriplegic now, but my problem started when I was still an invisible illness. I was massively fatigued. Previously, I used to be a very active swimmer. You could catch me in a swimming pool 5-6 days a week. And then fatigue started setting in. I started falling over every now and then. And so I was very much an invisible illness. So I stopped being able to work, but I was still trying. And you want to speak to the DWP with hope about your illness, right?
Yes.
Like when you want to, you don't want to be a drain on everyone's life. So you want to, everybody wants to help push the world around. I really believe that. People don't like to sit in the house all day alone and just twiddling the thumbs. But I told the DWP I would like to start volunteering in like the local children's hospital. and he immediately declared me fit for work. And at the time I was on employment support allowance, and that got stopped. Because that got stopped, my housing benefit was stopped for about 3 months. I was using, food banks. There was a stranger on the internet who did shopping for me. It was absolutely wild to have that happen, just because, like I say, at the time it was an invisible illness. And it is quite funny to me now as well, because now that I'm quadriplegic in a full power wheelchair with a headrest and everything, and people are like, "Oh, see, you've got a real disability."
Oh.
Not like all these people faking, and it's like,
could you have
5 years ago you would have said that of me.
No.
Yeah.
How sympathetic are you to that from a kind of position of ignorance rather than malevolence? So before you before you were diagnosed with MS, could you understand how that happens?
Yeah. I used to have 2 jobs, and I was studying, so I used to pride myself on being busy all the time.
Sure.
I used to have the very basic. I'd never collect benefits.
Yeah.
But I would say this. I mean, you were saying about Tory bashing, the work capability assessments, which desperately needs to be scrapped. I think movement is being made on changing it.
Well, it's 14 years. It's a philosophy. It's 14 years of thinking that people are filling their boots and taking the mick, and therefore the entire system, because it genuinely is, the politicians in charge do that. Civil servants might push back against it, but there's not a great deal they can do. And then it filters down to the shop floor, where people are making your life worse when their job is supposedly to make your life better. Could you work now?
Well, I'm hoping to. I'm about to start having a support. It's been a long while getting it,
Yeah,
but
of course.
I currently get carers who help me with my personal care and food throughout the day, but I'm also waiting for a support worker, through which I'm hoping to do charity to get back into university.
Gosh.
Because like I say, you want to help push the world around. It's, I'm myself. I'm 33 years old, so it's not. I don't want to retire just yet.
But I'm talking to you, and I'm getting paid for this. So that I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
That's quite funny, because of my situation, I ended up in the local paper, and one of the comments on their article, never read comments when you're in the local paper.
Never read comments when you're on national radio, Phil. Seriously, I think
someone was like, "Oh, he can answer calls. He could work for a call centre," and it's like, I am bedridden. I am not getting shouted at by Virgin customers on the phone. No way. Yeah.
No,
but there are still things.
Well, that's what I mean. If creativity almost, and yet the system for a long time, possibly forever. I don't want to lay everything at the feet of 14 years of Tory government. The system possibly forever has written people off, perhaps in a way that you describe. And as you highlight perfectly, Phil, if you're quadriplegic, we can write you off. But if you're not, we won't believe that you're disabled, and that leaves nobody to be helped back to work. It is 10:58. Thank you, Phil. My apologies to everybody waiting to talk about this, to Alex and Liam, Tim, Ali, Amanda, Aaron. A lot of A's there, and a Mark. But a lot of love coming in for the people who've contacted us, including people who clearly value the opportunity to have the conversation at least as much as any possible solutions or answers that we come up with. We will still be returning to this territory, and we will be specifically looking at the issue of long COVID as well. I think it is, whether people like it or not, it is going to be a bigger story, a much bigger story moving forward than it is currently. And of course, when the reality of COVID returns, it has never gone away. If we're not understanding long COVID properly, then we won't be responding properly to outbreaks and surges in, if you prefer, short COVID or normal COVID. It's 3 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Now, in the last hour of the programme, you needed a degree of experience or knowledge of the issues under discussion. In fact, very much one of those conversations that was driven almost entirely by personal experience of every comedian, every contributor except me. I think cautiously I would describe the next hour as the polar opposite. You need absolutely no profound personal experience of the subject under discussion to contribute to the next conversation. And in fact, I'm going to introduce a new regular. You remember, I used to do regular feature. I'd introduce a regular feature, and then I would forget all about it. I like to think we've broken that habit. We kind of let smear Keir slip a bit in the run-up to the general election, but actually, as historians of the future will attest, that was largely because smear Keir stopped working. They stopped trying it. By the end, what were they accusing him of? Having tea on Fridays with his family. I mean, that was when we resurrected smear Keir. And one of the main reasons why I regretted not playing smear Keir more often was because it was by far my favourite jingle of all the jingles that have ever been put. Oh, go on then, let's have it. Smear Keir, smear Keir, smear Keir. Don't forget to like it, YouTubers. And that's quite significant, although we're being silly. It's quite significant that the really hardcore stuff designed to smear Keir fell apart the longer the election campaign went on, culminating in that really ugly Monday morning, I think, last week, when people who really should have known better were seeking to attack the husband of a Jewish woman for observing or wanting to observe, prioritising the observance of Friday night dinner. That was, probably the end of smear Keir, wasn't it? That moment as well. Although I reserve the right to resurrect it. But I've got a new one, and it's called "What Was That All About?" That doesn't lend itself to musical production, does it? What was that all about? It's not the same as "What's Going On?" The Marvin Gaye topic envelope, where you just, what's going on? But I think that what was that all about is almost like the child of what's going on. So if there is a subject matter that we might last year or the year before have sat here and described some burblings from the likes of Braverman or Badenoch or Honest Bob Jenrick or Sunak or the rest of them, or Truss even, and I would have sat here, I'd have described to you what was actually happening, and then I would have gone, what's going on? And you'd have rung in and said, well, what they're doing, James, is, or the people that they're trying to appeal to are, or they've fallen into the trap of thinking that. But the child of what's going on is now, what was that about? And Lisa and Andy drew my attention to the "what was that about" question with a comment she made yesterday about the era of culture wars being over. I just take a quick moment to tell you that there is a remarkable archive available of members of the new government on the Full Disclosure podcast. We've spoken to about half a dozen of the people who have now got fairly big jobs in the new government, from Keir Starmer down, and Angela Rayner, from the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister down. We've got really good, interesting, deep digs into the personalities behind the politics. And of course, in the case of some, the personalities are defined by the politics, and vice versa. The politics can be defined by the personalities. So we're just putting together a little package. Is that the technical term? A package or a platform? We're putting together a little package stroke platform on which you'll be able to listen to all of these in one place, including James Timpson, of course, which was probably the most surprising of Keir Starmer's appointments, but not when you listen to him explain for an hour what it is that drives him and what it is that informs his dedication to prison reform. So what was that all about then, the culture wars? How many times did we sit here together and say, for example, what does woke mean? Once you remove the transgender conversation from the equation, and I think the fact that there was nothing left once you'd done that explained why some people spent the entire election campaign talking about toilets. But once you've removed the transgender conversation from under the heading culture wars, what on earth were you left with? What were they about? I remember the National Trust coming in for repeated attack, for having the audacity to put some history of the property in the foyer of the property. Some people felt that was... I wonder how soon it's going to be before you don't believe me when I remind you of some of the stuff that went on in the not-too-distant past. Printing some literature or putting up some posters in the foyer of a National Trust property explaining the role that the slave trade played in the creation of the fortune with which that house was built. That's anti-British. or it's white people hating themselves, or it's people being called upon to be ashamed of their own history or their own culture. I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it, really, to think that was relatively commonplace. Another thing that I think I probably would struggle to believe me if I told you about it. James Dyson is in the news again today. He's sacking about 1,000 British people. Dyson, of course, apart from the what's his proper name? The Wetherspoons Thundercat. Apart from the Wetherspoons Thundercat, James Dyson was pretty much the only business person they could find to big up Brexit. He's sacking 1,000 people after moving a lot of his production to Singapore a few years ago. But I was reminded this morning of that text exchange he had with Boris Johnson about tax arrangements for his own employees, and in which Boris Johnson sort of made several promises to see him right and to give him what he was seeking. The ministerial code, of course, states explicitly that a private secretary or official should be present for all discussions relating to government business. But by the time these texts emerged, Johnson was so mired in controversy and corruption that I think that they'd probably forgotten about it. Still, at least Dyson got a knighthood. So when I remind you of stuff that went on in the not-too-distant past, I think you will struggle to believe me quite soon. I hope you will struggle to believe me quite soon. Suella Braverman provides us with a timely reminder in the last 24 hours. She's launched an attack upon the pride flag, which is, I mean, just such an extraordinary thing to do. Talking about the pride flag flying over government buildings as if they were occupied territory, which means she probably doesn't understand what the words occupied or territory actually means. She says, I couldn't even get the flag of a horrible political campaign I disagreed with taken down from the roof of the government department I was supposed to be in charge of. Someone that I've never heard of before has written a very, very powerful piece in the newspaper today attacking Suella Braverman in the most stringent and I would argue effective of terms. Apparently he was a Conservative Party candidate at one point, goes by the name of Ian Dale. But I recommend that article very highly because it's a little bit of an echo of what Lisa Nandy was talking about. Lisa Nandy spoke yesterday. She, of course, is the new head at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. And she has declared that the era of culture wars is over. She said, for too long, for too many people, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves as a nation has not reflected them, their communities or their lives. This is how polarization, division and isolation thrive. In recent years, we have found multiple ways to divide ourselves from one another and lost that sense of a self-confident, outward-looking country which values its own people in every part of the UK. Changing that is the mission of this department. The era of culture wars is over. There's one fly in the ointment of this rhetoric, of course, and that is that in many ways Lisa Nandy is polarising people who felt that the National Trust shouldn't be displaying its history of the actual buildings in which they displayed history of the actual buildings. I suppose you could accuse Lisa Nandy, by calling for an end to polarisation, of polarising people who love polarisation, like Suella Braverman. It's a bit like the Karl Popper's paradigm of tolerance, isn't it? The intolerance of tolerance thing. But you're going to have to polarise somebody at some point if you want to end polarisation, aren't you? It's all gone a bit philosophical. Don't look at me like that. This is gold, this stuff. This is absolutely the content they come for. I want you to explain to me what the culture wars were. That's all. There's no fancy pants analysis here. I might have just brought Popper into it, but hey-ho, that's just me being pretentious. What were the culture wars? What were they all about? What were they? They're over, according to the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. If you wanted to pick two emblems, perhaps, of what we're talking about, I still, and again, this goes on the list of things that soon you won't believe me when I remind you. You just don't be ridiculous. I know Jacob Rees-Mogg was Secretary of State for Business, but nobody ever made Nadine Dorries Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, did they? So the simple question, really, although I don't know what the answer is, I never fully worked it out, what were the culture wars? So the circular firing squad is underway now. Kemi Badenoch has accused Suella Braverman of having some sort of breakdown in America, because she's still fighting the culture wars that for quite a long time Kemi Badenoch seemed to be a senior general in. But something about that election result on Friday appears to have taken all of the wind out of the sails of so-called culture wars. 30p Lee, of course, didn't he say when just before they made him deputy chairman that they were going to have to fight an entire general election campaign on culture wars and transgender toilets? I may have misrepresented him slightly. I can't even remember what party he was in at the time. He must have still been in the Tory party, wasn't he? Because it was before he became Tory party chairman. So we talked about them a lot. I wonder if this is one of the great signifiers of the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years. You go back to Boris Johnson and shortly afterwards. We talked about a lot of things because we knew there was something wrong with them, but we were never entirely sure what they were. And I'm putting the culture wars on that list. What were the culture wars? And I suppose, if you're feeling clever, are they over? How can something be over if we never really understood what it was when it began? What were or are the culture wars? And remember, we're leaving the transgender conversation out of this because, largely because I end up getting absolutely mullered by everybody with a strong opinion, even if they completely disagree with me. Beg your pardon, even if they completely disagree with each other, they usually manage to agree that I'm awful. So I'm afraid I'm not dipping my toes into those particular waters anytime soon. But the broader culture wars, what were they? When Lisa Nandy talks about the polarisation, the division, the isolation, when she talks about the way we think of ourselves as a country, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves as a nation, and the communities who are and are excluded in some way from that dialogue, what was being talked about? And given that we found it all so, what was the word I was going to say? Given that we found it also baffling and dispiriting, why did they do it? So I think we've distilled it down there to what were the culture wars and why did they do it? A question that perhaps assumes a greater resonance given the scale of the defeat that they suffered last week. What were the culture wars and why did they do it? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And if it helps, pretend I've been asleep for 5 years. Or pretend I've been asleep for 12 years. I fell asleep at the end of the Olympics opening ceremony in 2012, where I saw Windrush being celebrated. I saw the NHS being celebrated. I saw the power and value of immigration to our island story being related in powerful and moving terms. I saw incredible unity and diversity on display on a stage that the entire world was looking upon. And I'm not sure I've ever felt prouder to be a Londoner. And then I fell asleep on a tidal wave of euphoric patriotism. I fell asleep. I've woken up today and I've read that the culture wars are over, and I want you to tell me what they were and why they did them. 0345 6060 973. I'm always wary of using texts and tweets that then suck the stuffing out of somebody who's waiting to come on the phones. But my mate Scott has given this quite a lot of thought. Very cultured man, you see. He says, I think the culture wars were just a device that the government used to look like they were doing things without actually needing to do anything or, crucially, spend any money. I think that's a large part of it. But the calculation behind what else they might achieve is one that I never fully understood. Do you remember when they all had flags? I think this was before we used the phrase culture wars. Do you remember when they all competed? It was like a sort of Saturday Night Live sketch where it starts off with a politician who has a tiny little flag on their desk next to the Newton's cradle. I got a Newton's cradle for Father's Day. I've wanted a Newton's cradle since I think I must have been at friend's for the day, and we went to see his dad in his dad's office. So we were out shopping with his mum and we popped in to see his dad in his dad's office, and his dad had a Newton's cradle on his desk, and I thought that was the most sophisticated and fascinating thing I'd ever seen. For reasons that I am not here to analyse in depth, I never got one. I never. Is it something you can buy for yourself, or is it something you should wait for someone else to buy you? But this year, what do you get for the man who's got everything? And I told them, I said, I'd like a Newton's cradle, please, and some biscuits, if you're interested. And I got both. I got some wonderful biscuits from the biscuiteers, and I got a Newton's cradle from the Science Museum. Don't look at me like that. You know what a Newton's cradle is, don't you? It's the balls. The balls. The balls! Yeah, the metal balls on strings, and you pull one back and it goes clickety, 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 clickety. Magical radio. 21 after 11. Lil's in Rawton. Rawton or Rowton?
It's Rawton. Hello, James.
Well, is it though? Are there no Rowtonians? Is there a culture war in Rawton between the Rawtons and the Rowtons, or not?
No.
Carry on then.
We're very firmly Rawton.
Glad to hear.
So I, due to boundary changes, I am now blessed with having Danny Kruger as my MP. And
he was the one. We should actually, for people who don't understand your sarcasm, Lil, we should dig out that clip of Danny Kruger, which for me was probably, and just think about how stiff the competition was for this, how the stupidest public statement of the entire general election campaign. But I shall keep that in my locker for the time being while you tell me the main reason for your call.
So, culture wars is a diversionary tactic. It's being borrowed from the Christian right in America. And Danny Kruger is an exemplification of that, because it's not just about picking on trans people, it's picking on anyone that's different. So last year in March, he went to one of these conservative conferences and he said to his audience that it was only a heterosexual couple that could provide the safety and stability that society needs. So as part of being a new constituent, I sent him a pleasant introductory email yesterday asking him to explain how me, as a lesbian who's been in a partnership for 26 years, how I made this country less safe.
Good Lord.
Or less stable. Funny enough, I haven't received a response as yet. But a lot of the kind of where it's succeeding in American politics, you get the right-wing conservatives who are attempting to emulate that.
And we use the word Christian in a syntactical sense rather than a doctrinal sense. The idea of loving your neighbour, turning the other cheek, not committing adultery, or various other things. Apparently, the rules don't apply to them, but they are very devout Christians. A little bit like Jacob Rees-Mogg's attitude to the poor. You can call yourself a Christian, but it doesn't come with any actual requirement to behave in a remotely Christian fashion. I've double-checked on this because I was worried that you might be misremembering. I only out of paranoia, but what he actually said, the normative family, the mother and father sticking together for the sake of the children, is the only basis for a safe and functioning society. If I were doing his PR, I'd say normative just means majority, so that will be true in a majority of cases.
Well,
but you felt he was calling you abnormal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all know the statistic that if we're going for normative, meaning the majority, then because we're not Han Chinese, we're all non-normative, because that is the largest culture in the earth, is the Han Chinese. So everybody that isn't. I think it was Dave Gorman where I got that from. But yeah, so anyone that...
Well, this is more substantive than I realised. I mean, you're giving me an example of the culture wars, but it's designed to make anything other or anything different questionable or subversive, and I mean, history's taught us when that happens. Is it over, do you think, or is Lisa Nandy being a bit optimistic?
I think she's being hopeful.
Yes,
and
we
I
like
think
hopeful.
She's giving.
We're going to overdose on
message.
hopium soon, you know.
Yeah, hope is powerful. I think she's being hopeful, and I think she's saying, giving a message to the Conservatives and to Reform that you can keep firing these arrows, but we're not going to be firing them back. We're not going to engage.
And a lot will depend on what the media does, won't it? Whether or not the media continues to... Is that Jacob Rees-Mogg cycling past on his penny farthing, or is there a bird in a tree?
It's a bird in the tree. I'm stood in my garden.
Stay there. I'm going to see if my Chirp-O-Matic app will be able to tell me what that bird is. Wait there. Everyone be quiet, but don't fight. That last bit there could deliver. Hang on. What? Oh, yeah. I think that might be a blackcap, a garden warbler, or a song thrush. Lil.
It's either a blackcap or a song thrush. And
so the garden warbler's off. Garden warbler's out of the running.
Yeah, I've never had one. My birdie app thing has never picked up a garden warbler, so it's either the blackcap or the song thrush.
And can you not see it?
No. I have trees in my garden and they kind of sit up.
Do you know what the Latin name is for a song thrush?
No idea.
Turdus philomelos, which brings us back to Danny Kruger.
Yes.
26 minutes after 11. Here is my favourite contribution of the general election campaign.
In power for a long time, and I recognise people feel like it's time for change. Actually, we represent the change that's needed. Labour represent more of the same. They might have different faces, but they would be the ones carrying on the failed British state that has caused so many problems for our country.
So, that's just extraordinary. So don't vote for... We've been in charge for 14 years, but if you vote for the other lot, things will carry on as we've done them, and that's awful. Danny Kruger, or of course Dunning-Kruger, to give him his full name. 27 minutes after 11 is the time. Matt's in Basingstoke. Matt, what was that all about? Not the stuff with the bird song, the culture wars.
I think the culture wars don't go to your previous call of the Christian right in the US. I think it goes back further. I think it goes back to the 30s in Germany with Goebbels, the demonisation of groups.
And this was you could both be right. It's not. She's talking about the modern iteration of something that you're taking back even further. But what was it? What were they trying to do?
I think it's a distraction technique more than anything because of the Tory incompetence, and I feel like the culture wars. It's a demonisation. It's making people fear the other. When Sunak went after people with benefits, that put the frighteners up on me because there's people that I think the new frontier is going after people that are on the spectrum, neurodiversity.
I think there was a Reform candidate, wasn't there, who used the word vegetables in the context of autism.
Yeah, that made me sick to my stomach.
But on the plus side, Matt, I'm sure it keeps Nigel Farage awake at night.
Yeah, we had a Reform candidate where I am, and he had to step down because he was linked to the BNP.
What an extraordinary coincidence.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought it? So you and the last caller, and Lil, it's actually a little bit more serious than I'm allowing because of what it echoes. You'll like this from Becky. It might sound silly as a concept, but it's just giving a tabloid term to deeply sinister right-wing values. They want to return society to a time when there were no gays, no visible disabled people, and women knew their place, i.e. the kitchen, and pumping out heirs / workers, depending on what your social position was. So there was something substantive and serious beneath the apparent silliness. But they could never come out and say any of that. They just had to allude to it or nod to it, or, in the case of Suella Braverman in the last 48 hours or so, accidentally perhaps say the quiet bit out loud.
I feel like that is what a lot of Reform candidates said. They said the quiet bit out loud. They said the bit when you're down the pub and you hear the classic phrase, "I'm not racist, but."
Yes.
You just kind of, as soon as you hear that word, you hear those words, you think someone's going to say something that's going to be. Yeah.
So how confident can we be? Because I suppose, Farage and his mates have got a few seats in the House of Commons now, which they've had them before, but not as many as 5. How confident can we be that the culture wars are over? A lot of it will depend upon how much attention the media give to the people who are still keen to fight them. The people who, if we're honest, haven't actually got anything else.
No, I think I feel like the press barons, if you want to call them that.
I like that.
But they've not got their. They've got a regime that's not going to kowtow to them. You'd like to think.
We shall see.
The press reform potential.
There's a lot on that list, isn't there? I don't think that will be near the top of it, but we live in hope. Matt, I'm moving on only because I'm a little bit late for the news. Consensus seems to be it was a black cap, that bird. I've enjoyed the way that ornithology has sort of elbowed its way into the programme in recent weeks. It really, Keith said it's really taken off. Well done, mate. That was so funny. I forgot to pretend it was my own joke. Here's Thomas Watts with the headlines. 11:33 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a funny one, isn't it? Because I wonder whether the reason why I always found it ridiculous was precisely because its proponents never stated explicitly what it was that they were fighting, what war it was that they were fighting. So the phrase culture wars became easily mocked. But actually, if you look at the evangelical right or the history of othering, the history of demonization, then it was always a much more serious matter than perhaps some of us allowed. I mean, you can be serious and ridiculous at the same time. I know that sounds a little bit oxymoronic, but that's what they say, isn't it? The fascists often say first they laughed at us, and now we've locked them all up in concentration camps. And so that idea that beneath and that's why it's probably a mistake, albeit it's one that I'm not going to undo today, to leave the transgender conversation out of this debate, because the completely disproportionate focus on what is about 0.7% of the population is obviously that it's almost as if that became the acceptable face of othering. And that's why it got so much attention. It's why some people who can't say what they want to say about gays anymore, or foreigners, or even disabled people or women or whatever it may be, are obsessed with toilets, because they can sort of flirt with some of the old bigotries without absolutely having to resurrect them explicitly. So maybe it was a bit more serious than I was previously aware, and that makes it an even more troubling question. That Lisa Nandy says it's over. Are we sure it really is? 0345 6060 973. There's a little bit of context for you. Under 14 years of Conservative rule, there were 12 culture secretaries, many of whom, and this is editorial from Lisa Nandy, but I think you probably recognise it, many of whom spent a good portion of their time feuding with the BBC or clashing with organisations like the National Trust. Now, perhaps naively, I don't see that as being reminiscent of Joseph Goebbels. But attacking news outlets, especially ones that are sometimes frustratingly impartial, as in they'll treat an idiot like a genius and claim that they're two sides of the same argument. That was an encounter between Andrea Leadsom and Pascal Lamy of the World Trade Organization that I had the misfortune to host once on the BBC. And the idea that you treat them both as equal and opposite forces of knowledge and intelligence is palpably absurd. But it didn't stop people like Nadine Dorries attacking the BBC. The most energetic, said Nandy yesterday, on that front was Nadine Dorries, who took the role under Boris Johnson and at one point labelled the BBC an institution riven by bias and staffed by people whose mum and dad worked there. Nadine Dorries, of course, famously employed, I think, both of her daughters in her parliamentary office, but certainly one of them. So that's why I always found it really silly, because of the personalities of the people fighting them. You know, 30p Lee and Nadine Dorries. You're not going to see them appear on the hill on the horizon and say, uh-oh, lads, we've really got our work cut out in this war, are you? Nobody is. But you look at some of the other stuff that could be filed under this. You're looking at how reproductive rights are talked about in America, how this Danny Kruger character talked about normative families and their relationship with society at large. And then you remember that, as Peter's just reminded me, that in Nazi terminology, protective custody meant the arrest without any judicial review, so entirely at the whim of the authorities, of real and potential opponents of the regime. So when you include all of that stuff, the culture wars will never be over. Eugene is in Penzance. Eugene, what would you like to say?
James, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm sat in the car park in Penzance in Cornwall.
But you have got a phone. You have got a phone, to be clear.
Yeah,
well, then we'll be fine.
Well, yeah,
we'll be fine.
The long strings worked okay.
Good stuff.
This idea that you've been talking about, that I want to pick up on, this idea about the culture wars being this kind of oxymoron of it being serious and trivial at one and the same time.
Yes.
I was kind of thinking about that a little bit, and it does ring true. My feelings is that the kind of the stuff that we get in the media about the culture wars, and maybe the things that some politicians say about them, are designed to distract from other things that are going on.
Yes.
This notion that that this idea between the right and the left.
Don't look at the NHS. Have a look over there at the National Trust.
That's right. Look over there at the National Trust or the BBC, or this notion of whatever woke is, which seems to be able to shapeshift into almost anything as far as people at the right of politics.
Yeah,
seem to want to.
And I can never really tell you what it is. I'll give you some examples.
That's right.
I mean, a police officer wearing a pride helmet, and you'll say, "Well, what, all the time?" No, just on the day of the.
Just very briefly. I mean, woke in now is a bit like gay was amongst kids in the 1990s. I remember I was working as a school teacher. I retired a couple of years ago as a school teacher in the 1990s, and the word gay was bandied around like it was something that was seen as being substandard. So I was told that I had a gay car.
Right.
It was a blue Austin Metro. Okay. I mean, they didn't like it very much, and so woke became this kind of.
I don't know where to go with it. I don't know where to go with this. I love the fact that you told us what the car was. Sometimes sometimes the magic is in the margins, isn't it? If you hadn't told us what the car was, that would have washed over me. But there's still a bit indignant about it. It was a blue Austin Metro.
It is.
It was bloody blue. It was blue, lads.
This idea that it was kind of cruising around late at night looking for like-minded folks, something like that. This ridiculousness of it all. And I think the idea is to kind of distract us, to get the left versus the right. And the left, to be honest, are in a way just as culpable because they've fallen for it.
Yes, some have. Some push back.
This notion that you can get yourself completely off your nut on the policies of the National Trust.
Yes.
Where at the same time there are horrendous things going on within society and horrendous things being considered within government that no one's paying a lot of attention to because they're distracted by this
crikey.
culture war.
I mean, I would probably, from a position of self-defence, argue that you can do 5 hours a week on how awful these policies are and 1 hour a week on how mad this National Trust conversation is. I don't think that...
I think you can from your particular perspective. I absolutely agree with you because the idea is you take the issues of the day and you discuss them, and there's
you've got to diffuse them sometimes. You've got if people are I struggle with this on an almost daily basis. People are marching around being dangerously stupid and begging for attention. The temptation is not to give them any attention, and then you end up with someone like Andrew Tate influencing an entire generation of school children, and it was clearly a mistake not to give them more attention and point out all of the flaws in their thinking.
It is difficult to get like a balance between the two,
isn't it?
But yeah, I get the feeling that this stuff is designed to distract. This stuff is designed.
Yeah, well, there's two. It could be doing both at the same time, Eugene, couldn't it? It's designed to distract, but it's also quite deeply sinister. The more you dig into it, and the more you remember the historical consequences of othering. So the lines from Suella Braverman that Ian Dale has very powerfully picked up on and pledged to fight tooth and nail to prevent from coming anywhere near the head of the Tory party. It has been very, very violently crossed by Suella Braverman, and she's using the LGBT plus flag as camouflage. She'll probably claim, I'm only talking about transgender people, which is still pretty gross. But, of course, the flag is not exclusive to transgender people. It's everybody in that spectrum, on that rainbow, which is, of course, what the flag represents. Ian has written a great speech today, and quite a few people have agreed with him. What a disgusting speech, he tweeted the other night, and she seriously thinks she has a chance of leading the Conservative Party. Not while I have a breath left in my body. Moderate Conservatives need to stand up and be counted. This will not stand. Good for Ian, and absolutely no sniggering when he is described as a former Conservative Party candidate, because albeit that his last adventure in that field was very, very short, he was a proper Conservative Party candidate prior to his broadcasting career, came vanishingly close to getting a seat. So I needed to remind myself of that when I saw that description being deployed in the newspaper today, because I thought they were taking the mickey. 11:43 is the time. Let's go back to the culture wars. What were they? What are they? And depending on what your answer is to those two questions, are they actually over, or is Lisa Nandy being a little overly optimistic? There's a lot of it about. George is in Sheffield. George, what do you think?
Hey, mate. Big fan, first-time caller.
Thank you, George. Welcome.
Thank you. So I guess I kind of look at the culture wars as an attempt to divide two cohorts of people. So
Yes.
I'm from a very working-class factory background, and I think of the lessons that I got from my late dad and family, and the sort of concerns that concerned him in his life, i.e., can I put food on the table? Am I earning enough money to pay the bills? And growing up looking at the left through that lens of, a much more simple definition of the left. And then I was the first in my family lucky enough to go to university, and then my sort of world opened up, and you think about, I know you're not talking about trans people, but climate change and all these broader topics that I think, perhaps more working class factory type lefties don't really think about. And I feel like, and that's not always the case, obviously some people do, but
of course.
I feel like the culture wars is very much a deliberate attempt to put a spanner in between those two groups and kind of move the sort of, let's call them more traditional working class people away from the
So look at these lefties working so hard to protect the interests of people who are nothing like you, and about whom you may not disapprove or despise them, but the proof that they're working so hard to protect them means that they're neglecting you.
Yeah, exactly. And
wow.
I think I look at my dad and stuff, and he was a very hardworking guy with no malice in him whatsoever. But he just literally didn't think about those kind of wider things. If I'd have asked him about climate change or gay rights or trans people, it was so beyond his worldview. He had no opinion
and it's a
about it
misrepresentation. I'd say, of bandwidth. It's perfectly capable for progressive people, whether they're politicians or not, to prioritise and to care about lots of different things at the same time. But I hadn't thought of this. It's a brilliant description of one major purpose of culture wars was to pretend to parts of the population that lot over there only care about these very narrow issues. And bizarrely, the people making that claim are the ones that never shut up about this very narrow palette of issues.
Yeah, of course. And I think we see that with, I don't like the term identity politics, but when that stuff comes up, I feel like that sometimes is the stuff that can be used to pull them types of people to vote the other way. You look at Clinton.
This is what Eugene meant. This is what Eugene meant about the left sometimes falling into the trap of spending so much time fighting this that they end up looking like the accusation is true, and they do care more about it than they do all of the other stuff, whether it's NHS policies or the rest of it, or whether it's people like your dad, just the concerns that they have, the day-to-day concerns, the political concerns that they have.
Absolutely, yeah. And I feel like that's always the challenge on the left, to bring those two groups and their interests together.
Strong. That's a good analysis. Just because you're on an A star at the moment, this is just to not knock the star off your grade for this contribution. Which politician said they weren't going to watch the Euros last time round because the footballers were taking the knee? I genuinely can't remember, but that's pure culture war, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it was madness. I mean, I'm not really into football at all, but I did follow all that stuff. And the
Can you remember who it was? Can you remember who the politician was?
Was it 10:20 Anderson? Or
I don't know if it was. I genuinely can't remember. And you're not alone. No one's allowed to look it up. But my texts are open 84850 or. Don't forget, you can WhatsApp me now, 0345 6060 973. When do I stop saying that as if it's a novelty? Because it's been in place for months now, hasn't it? And I still say it as if, God, if they put a man on the moon, you can WhatsApp me now, 0345 6060 973. Incredible. It is 11:47. It is 11:49. I like it when there's a bit of dispute. I think it probably was 30p, but there are quite a few other contenders. I shall confirm when we've actually found some footage in order to make it an incontrovertible conclusion. If there is no footage, we may never know. Who was it that said, as England prepare to fight a semi-final? Is that 3 now in 7 years? Three. The last 3 major tournaments we've been to, we got to at least the semi-finals. It is, isn't it? It's madness, that. Listen, we haven't been playing brilliantly, although the last game marked a distinct uptick in performance. And if I were to go all kind of BBC 5 Live at the moment, I'd probably be having phone-ins about Harry Kane's position in the team, but thankfully none of us have to endure that. But you can't. I mean, Southgate's tenure as manager is historically extraordinary. It's historically extraordinary, and whether he gets the credit for that in the event of us not picking up a trophy before he hangs up his studs, I don't know. I don't know, because there is only one England manager of the men's team who has picked up a major international trophy in the last 100 years. 10 to 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Back to the culture wars. I'm going to tell you something quite funny, all right? Well, first of all, I'm going to confide in you that I don't know how much longer we will be engaging with the awfulness of the last lot. I mean, it can't be indefinite. You're not ready yet, according to my calculations and previous phone-ins this week. You're not ready yet to get stuck into the Tory party weeds. I don't mean Jacob Rees-Mogg. I mean, as a figure of speech, the Tory party weeds, as in who's going to be the next leader. At the moment, my sense is you don't really care. But we will have to, at some point, start looking forward when we bring in Conservative and being hopeful, like Ben Houchen was yesterday. I really liked that speech from Ben Houchen, that interview Ben Houchen gave, about wanting, despite being a Conservative mayor, he really wanted the Labour government to do well, because that's patriotism. I would remember when Ed Balls was Shadow Chancellor, and George, this makes me sound so naive, George Osborne it would announce bad economic news, and I'd always thought to myself, what does Ed Balls think today? Does he celebrate because this is good for them, or does he mourn and commiserate because it's bad for the country? And I think that's probably a dichotomy or a fence we all fall at. But Ben Houchen didn't yesterday. He came out as a Conservative mayor and said, I really wish this lot well, because it would be good for the people that I represent as a metro mayor, a regional mayor up in the northeast. It's really interesting, isn't it? So I don't know how much longer we will be looking in the rearview mirror, but I'm not stopping yet because it's so much fun. And today's example is some very powerful interventions from Kemi Badenoch at yesterday's Shadow Cabinet, where she was very rude about Suella Braverman. But I think something upon which we can all agree is that she spoke very powerfully of the importance of not leaking information to the media from Shadow Cabinet meetings. I know what you're thinking. How do you know that, James? Well, the answer is that it was leaked to the media by someone trying to make Kemi Badenoch look good. So if you needed to distill the current state of the Tory party down to a single event, it would be somebody, I'm not saying it was her, but it would be somebody who was present at the Shadow Cabinet meeting and really wants Kemi Badenoch to look good, leaking to the Times that Kemi Badenoch has called for an end to all leaking, and lots of other stuff designed to make her look good, including wondering out loud whether Suella Braverman is currently having some sort of breakdown in America. All of it leaked verbatim to Stephen Swinford of The Times. It's on the front page today. So fair play to Kemi Badenoch for stating that leaking should end, something that we know because someone who wants her to be the next leader of the Tory party, whoever that may be, I'm making no allegations or accusations, somebody who wants Kemi Badenoch to be leader of the Conservative Party, possibly because they agree with her stance on leaking, has leaked to the newspapers that she wants an end to leaking. And she, of course, was a big player in the culture wars, particularly on the question of white privilege and critical race theory, the claim, if you like, that there's almost no such thing as racism, or that history doesn't teach us that black people and white people have been treated differently for decades, indeed millennia. I saw an amazing picture today. It stopped me in my tracks. My mate Robert Lindsay posted it on Twitter, of Ella Fitzgerald under arrest in a jail cell because she'd performed in an area where segregation was still in practice. And as Robert said, the realization that this stuff went on in your lifetime, in this case in his lifetime, not actually in mine, but the realization that this stuff went on in your lifetime is sometimes impossible to recognize. And on the serious side of the culture wars, people hate that stuff being taught. They think it is somehow self-loathing to teach that white people used to treat black people in that way. And that's where they are clearly a more serious issue than I have sometimes allowed. Tom's in Newcastle. Tom, sorry, mate. What would you like to say?
No, it's okay. I think your last call, actually, to be honest, changed my mind about why the culture wars were the culture wars.
Go on.
I think he's right. It was to split the Labour Party.
I'd not thought of it like that before. Had you? You hadn't either, had you?
No.
Look at this lot. They only care about that. They don't care about you.
Yeah, and I thought it was more to keep hold of their UKIP voters that were leaving in droves.
Yes.
And it's more their Oxford PPE degrees coming in and going, well, we can get money from America, rather than them actually believing in it.
Well, I think some of them believe in it, but some of them clearly don't. Braverman I'd put in the first category. I'm not quite sure where Badenoch sits, and that they are currently the two front runners in this leadership campaign, although Tim Bale has done some research into it that Sky News published this morning showing that Badenoch is way, way, way ahead, even among the membership. Tom, thank you. I can tell you've got childcare issues, so I shall detain you no longer, unless it was another bird. I don't think Chirpomatic would be able to identify that one, though. 11:56 is the time. Why is Badenoch ahead? I told you this would happen. Do you remember why? Sometimes I think you don't pay any attention to me. Even my own producer said there was PMQs today. I said there definitely isn't. And she said, well, I think I'm going to trust the deputy political editor or our political correspondent more than I'm going to trust you, James. And I said, yeah, fair enough. All right, but we're still going to need some topics at 12 o'clock tomorrow. And here we are. It's 11:56 and there is no PMQs today. So you don't trust me enough when I tell you stuff. I told you that Kemi Badenoch would be the front runner, and I told you why. Among the Conservative Party membership, specifically, not among the population or even necessarily among the parliamentary party. But what has Kemi Badenoch been doing that a previous leader of the Tory party did, that would, in any sensible universe, have become the textbook of things not to do if you want to be leader of the Tory party or if you want to be Prime Minister. So because that person did it, no one else should ever go near it. But they're still so troubled as an institution. Kemi Badenoch's done something in the last couple of years that explains why the party membership love her, but also reminds us of the worst person in living memory to have led the Tory party. No, not him, the other one. I'll tell you shortly, if I remember. Chris is in Nottingham. Chris, what was that all about?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Chris.
Well, I'd say the culture wars was a concerted effort to just keep us all angry. Like we'd all hear the dog whistles and we'd all react to it in different ways.
Yeah.
So the right would be angry with the left would be tearing into the right.
Or each other. Don't forget, that's the great tradition of left-wing politics.
And all you do is face any possibility of reasoned debate.
How interesting.
It just becomes argument. Like that's all that's allowed to breathe in that area. And I think why did they do it? I think it goes back to UKIP withdrawing 317 candidates to allow a Conservative majority. They got an 80-seat majority and they went, oh, well, this is how you get an 80-seat majority. You hold on to the people who want you to be divisive and exclusionist. And that's how we stay in power. They bought into this fallacy that one of the great things that the Brexit referendum did is it gave the racists a lot of entitlement. They believed that they were the entire 52%.
Yes.
And the Conservative Party bought into that when they saw that UKIP, giving them their voters, gave them this huge majority. And
so they thought they had to carry on. And the problem is that when you're in power, these sort of nativist promises and these empty prejudices can't really translate into policy, so you end up almost being hoisted by your own petard, as they were on immigration, if not so much on Brexit. I mean, there's a lot more going on than perhaps we realised, I think, on this. And some of it may have been conscious, some of it may have been unconscious, but we can certainly all agree that we hope they're over. But it's like Tony Benn said about fascism, or about, I think it was fascism he was talking about. You never win that battle. It's never over. You push back when you can. Sometimes you're on top, sometimes you're not on top, sometimes you're losing the battle. But it's a battle for the ages. You never win. And I wonder whether or not that was something that fell into focus for a lot of us when Roe versus Wade got turned over in America as a consequence of Donald Trump's Supreme Court appointments. When Roe versus Wade was first celebrated, I think it must have felt epochal. It must have felt like a new chapter in history had been written that could never be unwritten. But all these chapters can be unwritten. I've got a mad topic for you next. It is 4 minutes after 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next to it. Listen, I've become latterly a little bit obsessed with people who've just turned on the radio. I can't remember why this happened. I think it's because I was digging into the data a little bit when we became the most popular talk show on commercial radio in the whole of the United Kingdom. It oscillates a little bit between us and the breakfast show, but obviously the tradition of radio means that if the mid-morning show is the biggest show in town, then somebody is doing something very right. And I wanted to look at the data. I was interested in and I'm always struck by, I think we've got the highest retention rate pretty much in the business. Like people, certainly for daytime radio, people listen for longer. But I'm always really offended when I see how many people don't listen for the whole 3 hours. I sort of think, who do you think I'm doing this for? You think I'm here for my own entertainment? You think I'm here for my own amusement? And so that's why Hook and Teasers and things like that is trying to remind you that there are many, many reasons why you should continue listening to the programme. But the converse of that, or the corollary of that, is that I've also started recognising that some people will turn on halfway through. And I've become fascinated by, in fact, almost to the point where I wonder if we can put together some sort of mad archive by what happens when you turn your radio on and you hear, the first thing you hear is me saying something completely ridiculous or something that completely out of context sounds horrifying or hilarious. Like, what if you turned on and literally just caught me in the last hour trying to identify using my mobile phone app what bird was singing in Lil's garden? Just I let you in on a little secret. So for reasons that I don't understand, I held the phone next to the microphone when I did that. Why would I do that? I'm sitting in this. You'll be able to see it on YouTube. Hello. Don't forget to ring that bell. J-O-B-ers. I held the phone next to the microphone in order to hear the bird song more clearly. That would be. I should have taken my headphones off, shouldn't I, and put it next to my headphones. Yeah, but listeners could hear the birds because they were on the blinking radio. They didn't need to be. Yeah, they didn't need to be on my phone. They were listening on the radio. You don't hear anything on the phone. The phone is recording. I don't have to put it next to the microphone because there's nothing happening. Oh, yeah, well, at least I'm in good company. The producer's as daft as I am. Thank God Keith was on the case. Did you recognise how stupid that was, yeah, man? Yeah, the election whisperer is in the house today, so we're all on our very best behaviour. It is 6 minutes after 12. So here is the question that I can't help imagining someone turning on the... So he said, there's this guy you should listen to. He's really good on politics. I don't know what he's going to do now the Tories are out of power because he's been banging on about them forever. He's probably lost his... It's worth tuning in to hear. And they go, I'll listen to this guy then. I like a bit of politics. I'll turn this on and see what he's got to say. And I'm saying, do you hate tourists? Which is right up there with the pedestrianisation of Norwich city centre, isn't it? Or managing to alienate the whole farming community. But it's a really interesting and potentially quite important question. The residents of Ibiza are joining residents of, I think, Tenerife are on the list. Barcelona seem to have gone in harder than almost anybody else. The whole of the Balearics. Parts of Catalonia and the Canary Islands. That's just on the French side of things. Venice, Greece. I think the first ones I saw were in Athens. I think Athens have gone quite... But I think I saw something in Greece where the residents are turning on the tourists. And it will be for different reasons. So in Ibiza, it is, I think, more a protest at the sort of hedonistic drug culture that moves in every summer. If you're in the north of the island enjoying the cuisine and the environment, then I don't think that these protesters are necessarily going after you. But I could be wrong. But I'm fascinated by the idea of a tourist destination turning on tourists because it seems to fly in the face of natural justice, doesn't it? You think of yourself as relying on tourists economically. What was I reading yesterday? I was just reading Anne Cleeves' latest book. I love Anne Cleeves. Just reading Anne Cleeves' latest book, which is set in Devon, actually. And there was a character in it who was talking about having quite a weird work existence back in the day, because there was loads and loads of work in the summer and then no work at all in the off-season. And I've got a lot of friends in Greece, and they do very different jobs. They almost all work in some tourist-adjacent industry during the summer, but in some of their cases, I've got no idea what they do during the winter. So I've always thought that the case for tourism in societies or villages that rely on tourism was pretty strong. Venice is different. I presume that day trippers are turning up in Venice almost all year round. It'll be much busier in summer, but it won't actually be closed in the way that parts of Southern Europe, other parts of Southern Europe are. But these protests now are getting huge. They are, in Barcelona, they've started using water pistols to attack tourists sitting at tables. Marchers spraying water at diners, eating al fresco. Now, maybe this is relevant. Eating at Taco Bell and a Bivio steakhouse. And I don't know whether the Bivio steakhouse is part of an international chain. And if it is, then that might be why they were getting attacked, because they're not sitting in a tapas bar having some delicious, authentic cuisine. And certainly in Ibiza, one of the protesters said that they are not against British tourism, but fighting against the type of tourism attracted to our island. We welcome anybody who wants to enjoy our local culture, gastronomy, local traditions, beautiful beaches and covers, but we're against the massification. That's a woman after my own heart. I think she's just invented that word. We're against the massification of the type of tourism attracted to our island. So there are lots of reasons for this. Illegal renting, Airbnb, locals being completely priced out of the area in which they want to live. I imagine the combination of Airbnb and holiday rentals has probably meant that the number of properties available for locals to buy has diminished enormously. In Athens, anti-tourist sentiment has hit new heights, with visitors literally being told to pack their bags. Slogans painted all over the city saying things like "tourists go home," "no tourists, no hipsters." I kind of agree with the second part of that. Have appeared on the walls all over the historic city, highlighting the growing tension between residents and tourists. So, 11 minutes after 12 is the time. What's going on? We did a What Was That All About in the last hour. We'll do a What's Going On in this hour. Tourism especially, and we have established, haven't we, in recent years, that the tentacles of this programme reach into all corners of the globe, particularly tourist destinations in continental Europe. But I think there's probably a British element of this as well. And it doesn't at first glance make any sense. The entire society is not beloved of the tourists, even though the tourists are in many cases the largest contributory factor to that society's economy. I'm thinking of small societies. I'm thinking of town, county-based, resort-based societies. So we know that people in Cornwall in particular, and to a lesser extent Norfolk, where I spend a lot of time, are increasingly furious about what second home ownership does to the domestic property market. I don't know what you can do about that except tax the second homes even more to make them less attractive purchases and hopefully then free up some of the real estate for so people who would go, I'd love to buy a second home in Norfolk, and then they look at the scenario and go, excellent, I can afford that. But then there'd be lots of people who, if the taxes were much higher, would go, actually, as it turns out, I can't afford that. But what do? Do they go and buy a smaller place? Anyway, we're not coming up with the solutions today. We're coming up with the questions. And the question is, do you hate tourists? 0345 6060 973. Can you explain to me why anti-tourist sentiment across Southern Europe in particular is reaching fever pitch? It's not something I have ever come across before, except in the context of second home ownership in Cornwall and places like that. But what? Because if it's to do with Airbnb ownership, why are they taking it out on the tourists? It's not the tourists' fault that bloke up the road, Dirty Gertie at number 30, has bought 5 flats, and instead of renting them out to locals, she's sticking them on Airbnb and making more money for the 6 months of the year that they're full during the summer than she would if she rented it out at a market rate for the entire 12 months. So 6 months empty, 6 months full, say, €1,000 a month, and she ends up making more than she would if it was 12 months full at €400 a month. That's maths, that is. So why are tourists across southern Europe getting it in the neck? And what is the British equivalent? So I'm struck by the success that far-right or very anti-immigrant parties have in British seaside resorts, former British seaside resorts. But that is because they're not popular destinations anymore. So if you're in Clacton or Great Yarmouth or somewhere like that, I've talked to you about this before, there is a much more palpable sense of lost glories than there is in London, for example, or in economically healthy areas. So when Carswell got in Clacton, I was absolutely heartbroken to learn about the levels of poverty that exist in that constituency. They'll be fine now. They've got Nigel to look after them. You can say what you like about him. He always prioritises other people above himself, and he is a great champion, a great protector of the poor, and a great believer in social care and help for the most vulnerable. So that's a silver lining to recent electoral events. And if you believe that, I've got a bridge you might be interested in buying. But the seaside towns have got this real... I know I get a bit dewy-eyed about this because I always holidayed in England as a kid. I was with Joe Pasquale yesterday recording a Full Disclosure, and that tradition of the end of pier entertainment that was very much in his formative years as a performer. It makes me quite emotional. It reminds me of my late father, all of that, the sort of Les Dawson, that world of variety. But it was already dying then. And the glamour is so close to the surface and yet so obviously gone forever in these places that I understand why the nativist snarl is so seductive. You've had something taken. It's why they all went mad for Brexit. Somehow thinking, yeah, look at our town. Our town used to be magical. Our town used to be amazing. And then something happened. And if you whisper in their ear, yeah, it was joining the European Union. That's why no one goes to Margate on holiday anymore. Margate's a bad example, actually, because its gentrification has been pretty effective and pretty speedy. I wonder whether people hate tourists in Margate, actually, because they are pricing the locals out of the area. And you get... Second homes are not the same as tourists, though, are they? Are they? Are second home owners the same as tourists? You've got a second home, you don't go into town thinking you're a tourist. I should shut up for a while, shouldn't I, and let you ring into the... Oh, all right, okay, seeing as you put it so politely. What's going on? Has it happened? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. As a resident of wherever you are, and we will include Britain in this, although I guess most obviously we're looking at Greece, we're looking at Spain, looking at all parts of Spain, particularly the Balearics and the Canary Islands. Venice, if you're listening in Venice. Why are the locals taking it out on the tourists? 0345 6060 973. It is 18 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I like this from Michelle because not only has York popped up most so far in British tourist destinations where the locals have had enough of tourists. I wasn't expecting York. I presumed it would be the seaside. But she also draws helpful parallels with southern Europe. She writes, I live in York and have been holidaying in Sardinia for the last 20 years. As Sardinia has got busier, my Sardinian friends feel that the balance has shifted and the locals are not happy now. Southern Europeans have a work-life balance and it's tipping. As for me, I hate York when it's busy with tourists. I guess we can all go down that route. The London Underground, you get... someone with a massive rucksack or someone standing in the bit to the platform. So you come down the stairs and you turn right to go onto the platform. There's a family of 8 people standing literally right in the car. Anyway, I'm not going to do full Victor Meldrew today. I'm more interested in what is going on elsewhere. Jan is in Alicante. Jan, what can you tell me?
Hello there,
Hello,
James. Yeah, it's various problems. One of the things is various parts. In fact, where I live, we haven't had rain for over a year.
What? None at all.
Nothing at all. We had half hour. We had half hour last Friday.
What did you do? What did you do? You had only half an hour of rain in over a year.
Ran out in it and did a rain dance.
Yeah, I bet you did.
So much so that we've got no water at all.
Oh.
We've drained our swimming pool, and we're using that for showers and washing up. But anyway, this is one of the problems. Now, because of Brexit, people are only allowed here for 3 months.
Yes.
They're not here for 6 months or however long they used to stay. So on all these urbanisations where there's hundreds of homes, all the swimming pools are full up with water.
Right.
So all the farmers are up in arms because they've got no water to water their crops with the olives and the almonds and the rice and whatever. And yet there's all these swimming pools sitting there full up with water, just standing there going rotten.
Yeah, but
so
but the pools would have been there anyway, even if it wasn't for. I mean, far be it from me to start saying I don't think we can blame this one on Brexit. I'll be talking myself out of a job. I like to blame everything on Brexit, but two and two.
It is one of the things. If you flew over and saw how many swimming pools there are, it's amazing. And here, because it's so hot, it's over 100 degrees here.
Wow.
The pools are losing 2 inches a day through evaporation.
God Lord.
So if people are living there, they're filling their pools up all the time.
So this is a climate change issue, actually. But
yes,
we've talked many times on this programme about how keen people are either to ignore the climate change issue or even in some mad cases deny it. It's a lot easier to blame it on swimming pools.
Partly. But that's one of the things. The other thing is with the Airbnb, which is also a problem in England, lots of people live on urbanisations, Spanish and English and other nationalities who have got their residence here and live here all year. What happens if you're living there all year and you've got a place next door to you that people rent out to Airbnb? You can have 14 teenagers turn up in a 3-bedroom
house.
And
there's a crossover. But so that you've done it. You've nailed it, because that is where the second homeowner and the tourist meet. I'm a second homeowner, but I'm renting it out to tourists, and I've got no control over who's going to move into your next door neighbour's home. So that might be why some of these rules, you may not even know this, because I don't imagine that they affect you personally, certainly not as a performer, Jan, but Alicante has got new noise-related restrictions.
There's lots.
Yes, what's
everywhere.
That for?
Because what happens, you're getting teenagers like the pools, like you might have 10 houses with their own communal pool. You get 14 teenagers turn up in one 3-bedroom house. Wow. They want to be in the pool all night long.
3 o'clock in the morning.
Playing music at top of their voice, shouting and screaming.
Wow.
All the people who live there can't get to sleep. Their whole summer.
It's all making sense. So there's going to be
because of these people.
Yeah, because it's happening all summer, as you say.
Yeah.
I mean, so the owner probably should care more. Certainly, the agents.
They don't. As long as they're getting the money. Plus, also, there's nowhere for the Spanish people to rent. Most people in Spain are on low wages, and they can only afford 300 to 400 euros a month.
Right.
Well, a lot of these places during August go for 2,000 euros.
That was the figure I just invented. I literally made up some numbers 5 minutes ago, and that was 400 euros for the locals could pay, and they're going to get 1,000, and you're saying 2,000. So they'll just leave it empty for the winter.
Exactly.
I sense.
And this is what happens because they make all their money up through the summer
and
then don't bother during the winter.
I'm going to have to move on, otherwise there's not going to be any room for anyone else left to contribute. You'd have covered everything. It feels to me as though you're a pressure cooker whose lid blew off when you heard that this topic was coming up on the programme today.
Yes, I was. I've been waiting for a while.
Yeah, well, better late than never, eh?
Okay, Jan.
You take care, Jan. It's lovely to talk to you. 24 minutes after 12 is the time. So that's a big element of it. And it is, she's perfectly mapped for us, the hinterland between the second homeowner, who I don't think of as a tourist, and the tourist against whom the locals are increasingly protesting. But of course, they go hand in hand, even if they are not necessarily the same thing. And the noise. Have you ever had that on holiday? There's nothing worse than not being able to get to sleep, is there? But imagine if it's your holiday home and it's been idyllic for 10 years. And now, because people who used to live next door to you for the whole of the summer, used to spend that whole 6 months there, can only spend 3. They're renting it out for the other 3. and you've got a right bunch of hooligans moving in for the duration. David is in Marbella. David, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Third time caller. Does that class me as a regular now, or do I get a
absolutely.
gold membership card?
Well, we'll see. It depends on the quality, not the quantity of your contribution.
Well, I fear that the lady before me has actually pretty much laid out all the most important points. I mean, I can only really echo what she's saying.
Well, then why are they shooting water pistols at people on Las Ramblas?
Well,
then?
So I saw that in Barcelona, and there is a lot of actual pushback on that from the local community, because as much as they are angered by it, a lot of them have said, well, come on, you know.
What are we going to do?
You've taken it too far.
Yes.
I'm glad that the lady before me raised the issue with water, because we literally barely saw a drop of rain during the winter. And the reservoirs at the beginning of spring were only 40% full. Now, we need that 40% to get to the end of the year now, when it usually starts raining in about November. And she's absolutely right, because I mean, if I look at it, I am literally stood looking out my window right now, and they're building on the opposite side of the road to where I live a new luxury urbanisation. Now, all of those
you keep using this word urbanisation. What is it?
That's generally
it's like an estate. Is it a Spanish word for an estate?
Multiple blocks of apartments around the pool.
Urbanación.
So they're building a new one of those. It's huge. Every single one of them is already bought off plan, and undoubtedly they're all going to be Airbnb. Now, all of those people that are going to move in, they're all going to need part of that 40% water.
Right.
All of those people are going to go to the local cafe. Now, I understand the comments around, well, it's good for business, a lot of money coming in. But if I want to go down to my little cafe that I go to for some breakfast, there's nowhere to park. Chances are the tables are full. The restaurants, you can't get anywhere near.
And it's getting worse and worse and worse in all the years you've lived there, because all of those things could have been true 15 years ago.
Yeah, it's getting the anger is really Airbnb is a huge, huge problem, and as the lady was saying, there's people leaving apartments to be rented all year round. Now, literally next door but one to me is an Airbnb. It costs €1,000 a week, and as she was saying, you get 10 or 15 young teenagers.
Really, this is a big recurring thing, because it's much cheaper than them taking out a package holiday, isn't it? They'll just rent an Airbnb, pay for their flights, and then they'll sleep 5 or 6 to a room.
Yeah, I mean, they'll say, obviously, 4 person per household, but then no 10 of them will turn up. And obviously, we have to then live side by side with them.
Gosh.
And obviously, the wages in Spain are relatively low. So all these houses that are going on the market are being snapped up by, you could argue, I work in Gibraltar, so my wages are much more than what I would if I was working in Spain. So you're getting people from outside of Spain where their wages are higher, buying up property in Spain where the wages are lower.
Right.
And, of course, then that creates resentment from people trying to get on the property ladder. It's just totally impossible for them. And so, the situation's coming to a bit of a head at the moment.
It clearly is. And you've answered my question, because the people marching through Barcelona were presumably young people who are being priced out of life.
I do think, though, that it's easy to blame them. I felt sorry for some of the people who were in those restaurants. I saw families, being squirted.
Oh,
but I can imagine that's quite intimidating.
Yes, at least it's only water pistols.
If you go on, for example, Reddit, there's a lot of Ask Spain and various Spanish kind of Reddit, and it's a mix of 50-50. They understand the issues, but they're not very happy with the way that came across
this
yesterday.
is it. So what you said, I mean, everybody recognises the necessity of tourism, but there are now things happening that we don't want to happen. We're talking about so many of the conversations we have on the show are about where the line is between expected and excess, and because of Airbnb and some of the other issues you've touched upon, a lot of people in Spain, a lot of Spanish people in Spain, and a lot of expats or immigrants.
But that anger really should be
directed at the homeowners, the landlords.
Well, the ayuntamiento, which is basically like the local council, because you have to get a license to operate an Airbnb. Now, there are some that are not doing that, of course.
And that costs money, so the council's making money out of issuing the licenses.
Yeah. But ultimately, they're signing off. I don't know if you can hear if I open all the construction outside of my door, they sign that off. They sign that off knowing full well that it will just all go to Airbnb.
It's going to make everything worse.
So at some point, it's going to come to a head, and people are going to realise, well, it's not just the over-tourism, it's also the local councils. And as it always does, there are certain political parties which are exploiting this problem, and you don't have to look too far from our current issues in the UK with the likes of Mr. Farage and so forth.
Is there a Spanish politician called Nigel Farage?
Well, his name is Santiago Abascal, who's the leader of the Vox Party.
And there it is.
And
blame it all on. So in this case, not even on foreign workers, but just on foreign tourists.
Yeah, I mean, there's an element in the back of my mind. You know, I'm going to see a friend in Malaga this weekend. I'm going to go and try and have some lunch somewhere. And Malaga's one of the ones that are now catching up in this. And they're right. You can see a lot of graffiti everywhere. Gearys go home, which is their name for foreigners.
Wow.
We spit in your beer. You know,
Yeah.
there's a thing in the back of my mind now. I remember when Brexit first happened, I had a Spanish girlfriend. She was doing a lot of work in London, and she was literally the day after the referendum was told by some staff in the restaurant she worked in the hotel,
Yeah.
"Oh, you'll have to go home soon, won't you?"
Wow.
And I remember how upset she was. And in the back of my mind, I'm already starting to think, am I going to be on the receiving end of some of this? When it's like, well, no, I've lived here for 15 years. I've paid my taxes. I have a mortgage. You know, I've got my full residencia.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
it's a bit
I
of
mean,
a
I hope not.
complex
Obviously,
situation.
just on a personal level, I hope not. And on a political level, the segue from tourist to immigrant is not part of the Brexit process. It was very much people who live here that the Brexit lot wanted to get rid of. Whereas this begins with tourists. But yeah, I mean, that is the problem with far-right rhetoric, is you don't know where it goes next, do you? Whichever other it starts with, and tourists are not historically viewed as a minority in the traditional sense, in the sense of vulnerability or othering. But yeah, I can see why you're thinking that, David. And there is a sense, isn't there? We're only 2 calls in, but they're both so deep into the story that I wanted to give them plenty of time to share their experiences. There's a sense of critical mass building here. And it won't be true everywhere, but so the place I go to in Greece, I love, and it relies almost entirely on tourism. But there would be a point, wouldn't there? There'd be a tipping point where building second homes and doing that, and it's largely empty during the winter. It's a very migratory society often, Greece. Spend the down season in the cities and then the high season at the coast. But it's. I wonder how many of us actually spend much time wondering about the people who live there all year round when we are there on holiday. It's 12:32. Amelia Cox has your headlines. Cross live now to a police press conference in
close just before 7
Bushy.
p.m. last night. Officers attended alongside colleagues from the East of England Ambulance Service and, on arrival, found 3 women with serious injuries. Sadly, despite their best efforts, the women, who are believed to be related, died a short time later at the scene. The victims are aged 25, 28 and 61. Our overarching objective today is to protect public safety and to locate Kyle Clifford, who is wanted in connection with the murder of the 3 women in what we believe is a targeted incident. We have extensive police resources deployed to various locations in North London and also the Bushy area of Hertfordshire. The manhunt also involves armed police officers and specialist search teams responding at pace in the wake of what has been an horrific incident, involving what is currently believed to be a crossbow, but other weapons may also have been used. If members of the public see Kyle Clifford, they urge not to approach him at any point and to dial 999 immediately. Kyle, if you're seeing or hearing this, please make contact with the police via 999. Beyond the immediate search operation, a major crime inquiry has been launched, and we also appeal to the public for any information in relation to the incident. This incident will be, of course, of concern to local residents. Additional local officers will be in the area today, so please do speak to them if you need to. You can report information online at hearts.police.uk/report, via web chat at hearts.police.uk/contact, or call 101 quoting Op Inforna. Alternatively, you can stay 100% anonymous by contacting the independent charity Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111 or via their untraceable online form at crimestoppers-uk.org. Thank you.
What's the connection between Carl Clifford and this family?
It is 12:36. I don't think that he is taking any questions. No, he isn't. Chief Superintendent John Simpson there giving an update from Hatfield in Hertfordshire on those 3 killings in Bushey. A little more detail on the 3 women believed to have been murdered and a reiteration of the urgency with which police want to talk to Kyle Clifford, a 26-year-old from the Enfield area of London who is wanted in connection with that triple murder in Bushey in Hertfordshire, and who, certainly according to the most recent reports, police believe may be still in possession of a weapon. So go carefully. At 12:37 is the time. 25, 28 and 61, the ages of those 3 women, but no further details currently available. Sorry for the abruptness of that. I should have warned you before we went into the news that there was a likelihood of that police conference happening, but I think that it all unfolded relatively seamlessly. We return to the rather less serious territory, of course, of tourism. And how many of us have picked up on the echoes of the conversation we had yesterday about housing? It's funny, isn't it? Because what a lot of the grievances in Spain and elsewhere seem to be is a shortage of social housing, or a shortage of affordable housing, albeit caused not so much by a failure to build new houses. They're still building loads of new houses. It's a failure to I tell you what they're not building. Oh, I like this. I like it when the words work in this way. They're building lots of houses, James, but they're not building any homes. That's the problem, you see. That's not the problem here. Here, they're not building enough houses or homes. But over in Spain, in Alicante and Marbella, they're building lots of houses, or they're building lots of properties, because they're usually flats. But they're not building any homes, which is why the young people are revolting by shooting their water pistols at people trying to enjoy some tacos on Las Ramblas. I got into terrible trouble on Las Ramblas once, but this is categorically a story I will never be able to tell you on the radio. That's the mother of all hooks and teasers, isn't it? You'll have to buy me a pint if you see me in public, if you want to hear the story of what happened on Las Ramblas. 12:38 is the time, or a small sangria. Sandy's in Palmer. Sandy, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Sandy.
I know I ring you a lot.
Well, how many times have you rung me?
Well, millions. I've only spoken to you a few times.
Yeah, I was going to say, I haven't heard from you for over a year.
Well, it's because I'm a pensioner now. I'm Spanish now. It's all happening. I'm going to be a grandma in September.
Let's look at all this. You've been far too busy to ring up me, but I was just pointing out that when you say that you phone me loads of times, people listening won't necessarily. Did we talk about your sister last time you rang? Was that one?
Yes, bless her.
How's she getting on?
It's complicated.
I don't want to pry. Anyway, let's go back to the tourists.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's not the tourists that are the problem. It's the model. I was telling the lovely girl who I always speak to.
Yes.
Mallorca's about the size of Cornwall.
Right.
Area-wise.
Yes.
We get 17 million tourists in a season. We don't have rivers.
No.
We have to rely on the dams and the rainwater.
Of course.
My daughter is she's a teacher. The other one's a social worker.
Okay.
They can't find anywhere to live. One of the partner's a policeman. The other one's a carpenter.
So the whole family's in Mallorca. The whole family's moved out to Mallorca.
Well, my daughters were born here.
I didn't know that, Sandy.
Yeah. So? I know me. They're Spanish and British.
Lovely. So they're
the
a
boys
perfect
are
example of
local.
the generation that are being priced out of property ownership by, well, I mean, I hesitate to say, but a little bit by people like you, though.
No.
Why?
No, because
Why not?
I came here to work.
Oh, I see.
Married a local.
Right.
We bought a house.
No, that's fine. That's me told.
same
It's nothing to
house
do
I'm
with you.
living in.
It's nothing to do with you.
Well, no, it could be. I mean, loads of my friends, on the quiet like to make a few bob.
Yes.
But that's not the point. I went on the march here.
Did you?
Because I want houses for my kids. I want sustainable tourism.
So who's the target
It's
of the march
sustainable.
then? Who's the target of the march? Because you're right, it's not actually the tourists, albeit that it
No.
looks like it is from over here.
No. It's people. It's the platforms like Airbnb. We want a sustainable tourism where people. I'd love people to come, but don't pay a 20 quid flight and go and stay in some, opposite me. They come and sit here and look at my washing.
Do
I
they?
mean, what sort of holiday is that?
Well, I've never seen you washing.
No, well, it's not advisable. It doesn't beat a sunset.
So you mean
You
that they're paying for cheap flights and then piling in
Yes.
to properties that are not traditionally tourist properties?
They're illegal
Right.
properties because you can't have a tourist let in a residential area here in Baleares.
I see.
It has to be a tourist area, which is fine. If there's a tourist let, the government controls the number of lets that are available, the places. But of course, in my block, we don't have fire extinguishers. We don't have emergency exits.
Oh.
A lot of the houses here have gas bottles.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the people who come over, I don't think they would know how to use a gas bottle.
No, it's quite scary that. Although, have I ever told you my only Mallorcan-based anecdote?
No, go on.
Oh, well.
Was I in it?
No, you're not in it. But the caretaker of the apartment block I was staying in was called Pepe.
Yes.
And I was staying with, it was the first time I ever flew. I was 11 or 12. I went to stay with my friend Justin. And they had a place in Mallorca. And one time, Justin's mum thought she could smell gas. So she found Pepe and said, Pepe, I think I can smell gas. And so Pepe went to the hut where the gas bottles were, big old things. Do you know what he did?
What?
He lit a match.
Oh, yes, they do. They used to do that in the old days. You're supposed to use fairy liquid and rub it round where the hole is.
Are we talking
And if
about
it
your
bubbles,
washing
the
now?
gas
Are we
is-
talking about your washing again now?
No, we're talking about finding gas leaks in a gas bottle.
And you look for the bubbles.
That's right.
But he lit a match. I've never run so fast in my life. I was only 11, but I knew that wasn't healthy.
No. We had once 1 year, and he chucked the bottle into the pool because it was,
To find the leak, the bottle. Oh, okay, crikey!
I think it was to stop.
Well, these are
But
these are. So, what can you do? Because you must know some of the people that own some of the properties that are being abused in this fashion. Yeah, I bet you have words with them.
We have. Well, the thing is, there's a website where you can report them, but that doesn't encourage good neighbours.
No.
But the problem is that it's
Nor does shipping in 15 teenagers to sleep there for a fortnight, does it?
No. But you see, the sort of people that do that don't care whether it's 15 teenagers or 50, and they're not living there anyway.
Yes.
What
does the end? How do things improve? How's it going to get better? Can't see it.
My solution, which is very radical, because as I'm getting older, I'm getting more lefty.
Yes, me too.
Would be no. If you want to buy a house here, you have to have a residence permit. No golden visas. You have to have been here 5 years. You can't own more than, let's say, 3 or 4 properties.
Right.
So if you own more than 4 or 5 properties, you would have to pay a super tax or
you become liable for different levies. They've done something a bit like that in Norfolk. Oh, they're trying to make it a lot harder around the Burnham Market area, and I don't think it's lefty necessarily. It's also you are pulling up the drawbridge a bit, albeit that you're married to a Spaniard, so none of this would apply to you.
I'm divorced from a Spaniard, which sort of is even better because I'm like whatever.
And how is your Spanish? How is your Spanish?
My Spanish is beautiful. My Catalan is even better.
You see, I got a couple of nasty people sending in texts about questioning whether or not you can speak Spanish. She doesn't only speak Spanish, she speaks Catalan. And these...
Mira, James.
Right.
Si quieres que te hable en castellano, te hablaré en castellano, perfectamente. Si vols que te xerre en mallorquí, te xerraré en mallorquí. Però jo no hi ha cap problema, perquè jo estic molt orgullós de ser catalanista y española.
That's beautiful.
What do you think? And I'm a Brummie.
Well, do you know, your accent is a lot less prominent when you're speaking Spanish than it is when you're speaking English.
I know, isn't it? But I'll tell you what, I had a question for you, but for question time, I never get through. When I speak Spanish, people tell me I'm English.
Right.
But when I speak Mallorquin, they don't. They think I'm Mallorquina. Now, is that because I've learned Mallorquin here?
Yeah, it is, because you're repeating. You're repeating by... So when I speak Greek, I sound surprisingly Greek, because the only way I learn... And my Greek's nowhere near your Mallorquina or your Spanish, but all I did was listen to Greek people speak Greek and just repeat what they said, and they teach... So that's why. That's why, isn't it?
And isn't it wonderful? It opens like pathways, and it makes everybody more friendly. I mean, we have got Vox here on the island, and Santiago Abascal is a wolf. But we'll manage, because people basically want to be nice to people.
This too will pass.
Very few folk want to be. Yeah, I hope so.
Well, it will.
I know when you're talking about the elections and France and everything, people always forget Spain.
They
but
do.
There was a dictadura here for many, many years.
Of course there was.
And when Franco died, they didn't disappear over the night.
No, I know you're. I mean, like the Vichy, just a longer time ago, but the same movements, and it's always there. It's always there, isn't it?
And we had a big kick off the other week with the ones here in Palma, because he ripped up the pictures of the Sis Rogers and Mallorquinas, the communist girls that were shot.
Oh God!
And that all kicked off. Anyway, I'm getting away from the subject. Tourists, we love you. Come and enjoy the island. It's beautiful. But don't spend 20 quid on a flight and come and look at me washing, please.
Yeah, just stay. Can I? I'll praise that for you, Sandy. I'll just stay away from Sandy's washing, will you? Honestly,
absolutely.
I
mean, you know,
bloody weirdos.
Yes,
honestly.
And I'm quite large. You can imagine. I get my underwear from the sailmaker.
Well, and on that bombshell, Sandy, you take care. It's lovely to talk to you. Let's not leave it so long next time. All right.
No. I'll try and speak to you again soon, James.
Thank
Wonderful programme. You keep me sane. Thank you.
God bless, Sandy. Thank you. It's 12:47. It is 12:49, and you are listening to the James and Sandy show on LBC. And I know who your favourite is, but I can live with that, I think. It's interesting, isn't it? There's a little bit more going on. So where does Venice fit into this? Because Venice is the cruise ships. So we can talk about anti-tourist protests, but it won't be the same conversation depending on where the protests are. I don't know that Venice has a particular... Well, maybe it has a problem with Airbnbs, but is it pricing young people out of the property market? They've introduced a tax. I think you have to pay $5 just to get off the boat in Venice, which you wouldn't have thought was enough to put anybody off, would you? But you never know. $5? No way. Let's go back to Arkansas. $5 to get off the boat. Well, maybe you wouldn't do it every day. I don't know. How long do they park up for? 10 to 1 is the time. Alton is in Blackpool. Alton, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Well, let me guess,
enjoy Sunday.
Go on.
I live in Blackpool and I run a guest house. So obviously...
You're quite fond of tourists.
I'm quite fond of tourists. But I do see a lot of complaints, and I think it's for different issues. We don't lack water in Blackpool.
No. I mean, I don't want to put anyone off travelling there, but we do have problems with water in this country, as has been very, very well documented.
Absolutely. We won't go into that one.
No.
And I don't think it's a second homes issue here.
No.
I think what it is, it's about deprivation and years of under investment. So where I'm going with this is, at the moment, the council, as people insist on calling it, the council are spending a lot of money. There's a lot of investment going into Blackpool, which I think is a very positive thing. Yeah, they're spending something around £1 billion in the centre. So new cinema, there's new kind of offices going in, there's new sort of leisure attractions. They've extended the illuminations that used to end at the end of October, now gone to January ever since COVID. They're doing that every year. They've spent $7 million on the lights. And the complaint I see a lot from locals who've been here a long time is all the money's being spent on tourists. What about us?
Oh, is it true? I mean, surely they can go to the cinema, can't they, or work in the office? So I mean, it sounds a bit Brexity, this, in that they're wrong. The money isn't all being spent on other people. It is being spent on them. But if someone's whispering in their ear that it's being spent on other people, it's a very seductive bit of poison.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there is something like that. And I think people, I mean, obviously, there's some of us who work directly in the tourist industry.
Yes.
But I think people forget in a town like Blackpool, if it wasn't for the tourists, then all the other industries, I'm not just talking pubs and clubs and all of that kind of thing, but everybody is benefiting from tourists coming here. Because I think Blackpool's population, I believe, don't quote me on this, peaks at about 2 million in the summer,
right?
Whereas its normal population is 150,000.
So Blackpool is still a big time tourist destination then.
Absolutely. I mean, it's increasing as well. The footfall in the town centre, I believe, increased last year. I mean, after COVID, it went a bit mad.
I thought it was declining. I mean, I used to go to Blackpool. I used to do the Golden Mile. The Doctor Who exhibition on the Golden Mile was one of the highest. It's not still there, is it?
It's not there anymore.
I was going to say, it's one of the highlights of my childhood. I absolutely loved it. But I don't know why. I thought that Blackpool had kind of had the stuffing knocked out of it, and that also that a lot of people got moved there who couldn't settle anywhere else, and that had a detrimental effect on the town as well.
There is some of that, but I mean, some of the investment is big new hotels.
Wow.
So Holiday Inn have just built a massive one, and they've also partly invested in the extension of the tramway.
Mrs. O'Brien. I want to persuade Mrs. O'Brien to. I just mean that, to come to Blackpool for a long weekend, or can't go to Blackpool for the week. I've got such happy memories about the tower's still there, isn't it?
The tower is most definitely still here. Yeah.
The Big Dipper still there?
The Big Dipper is that celebrated. Was it 100 years last year?
That is rickety. To be fair, I probably wouldn't go on that now. Something happens when you hit about 28, and things that used to be. I used to be a bit of a daredevil, but now roller coasters become a bit scary as you get older. It's quite weird, but that's a permanent one as well. So. Less scary than some of the temporary ones.
I went on the Big Dipper about 6 months after having major abdominal surgery.
How was that? Everything all right? But everything stayed where it should.
It did.
That's a relief. Would you like to name your guest house? You don't have to, but if you'd like a free advertisement, you're more than welcome to have one.
Oh, I would love to. It's the Westcoe, Wescoe guest house on the South Shore.
How long have you been doing that, Alton?
This is my 4th season, so I moved here 3 years ago. It's my 4th season running this place.
What were you in the business before? Have you been doing it for a while?
No, I was a management consultant.
So what made you think, at what point in your life or your career as a management consultant did you look yourself in the mirror and say, Alton, what you really want to be doing is running a guest house on the South Beach in Blackpool?
Well, the short story version of that, I guess, is I had major abdominal surgery, not expecting. I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease about 5 years ago, ended up having a bowel resection, and I think lying on my hospital bed, thought, is this really what I want to do with my life? I'd always had this little dream. And coming back to the Northwest, I went to university in Lancaster.
Yeah.
And then my partner said to me, you're never going to do it. And then within a week, my house was on the market because I don't like being told I'm never going to do it.
And here you are. Any regrets?
No, not at all. I absolutely adore it.
Oh, delightful. What was it again? Westcoe, Wesco.
COE.
COE. Hey, well, an extra egg at breakfast for anyone who comes as a result of this this plug on the programme, please, Alton.
Absolutely. I'll give them an extra rasher of bacon as well.
Whoa! Steady. Alton, take care, mate. 12:56 is the time. Fran's in Heanor in Derbyshire. Fran, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Fran.
I heard about this. I do have a house in a flat.
Yeah.
And I use Airbnb in Malaga.
Okay.
And it is true that all the locals are a bit against me because I rent it.
But you're Spanish.
But I'm Spanish.
But you rent it to foreigners.
For example.
Yes.
But let me take you. I'll be very quick.
Okay.
Back to 2005 when I finished my degree.
Yeah.
And I went to a bank in Spain and I said, how much I have to earn to buy a house? And this is almost 20 years ago.
Yes.
And they said, you'll never do it, mate.
Really?
They didn't say it like that.
Well, of course they didn't. They said it in Spanish.
Yeah. I have to earn about 4 or 5 times more than I was earning back then.
Wow.
And I'm a veterinary surgeon. So I came to the UK and I got a job here. I bought my house here and I managed to buy the second home in Spain.
Sure.
So foreigners coming tourists haven't increased the price locally.
Okay. It was already.
However,
Well, that I mean, they kind of had, because even then it was a massive tourist destination.
I know, but look, my dad used to be a taxi driver.
Yeah.
He needed foreigners.
Of course.
People in the coast, the area has flourished because tourists have come to that area. So without the tourists, the area wouldn't be what it is today.
Yeah.
So,
But there is it xenophobia creeping in a bit?
Yeah.
So we have
that's what I was
real
saying.
problems, and then someone pops up to say, blame them on the foreigners.
Exactly, because they can vote.
Yeah.
It's the easy target. This already has been mentioned in the program about the rise of parties like Reform here.
Yes.
They exist in Spain as well.
Of course.
And they just want no foreigners, no matter. It used to be only from Africa, people coming.
So it has.
But now it's extended.
It's segued into Europeans as well, which is exactly what happened with Brexit. Fran, thank you. I'm cracking on just because of the time, and I've got a bit of business I need to attend to before I hand over to Sheila. The first is an apology for not spotting the joke when I asked Alton what the name of his guest house was. Obviously, it should be called Alton Towers, although he would get sued into oblivion if he called his guest house Alton Towers. But about 408 of you spotted that joke when I didn't. And the Kemi Badenoch hook and tease. How on earth can she be riding so high in the polling of Conservative Party members? Answer, she's telling them Liz Truss-shaped lies about Brexit, claiming that she's signed trade deals when she hasn't. And that is what they are still lapping up. So you heard it here first. I would be very surprised if she doesn't win that contest when it actually begins. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's tiempo para Sheila Fogarty.
Oh, muy bien. Hablas español, I see. Thanks very much, James. 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 Thanks very much, James.